I was maybe 16 years old, and I was kind of a rebellious kid. I joined Tinder to meet some older guys, and I was matched with this really attractive 20-year-old that seemed really into me. Naive, I know. Anyway, he asked to pick me up from school the following day to get ice cream and walk around a nearby lake. I said yes. He picked me up and we had a great conversation. Nothing weird, and it seemed like we really enjoyed each other's company. When we got to the lake, no one was there because it was the middle of October and very cold on the water. We walked about halfway around the lake, and that's when it got weird. He started talking to me about crime documentaries and how he studied them and knew how to kill someone without getting caught. He started making tracks in the mud and said that he would wear shoes that were too big so the police couldn't match him on the shoe size. He picked up his shoes to show me 10.5 and informed me that he wore an 8. I got uneasy. He started strolling around me while I was sitting on a bench like I was prey. He went to one of those doggy baggy dispensers. He grabbed one of the bags and started swatting me in my face. I thought he might be trying to gross me out, so I half giggled and swatted it away. On one of my swats, he grabbed me by the forearm and pulled me in and put the bag over my head. Still, I thought he might be kidding, but as I tried to get away, I noticed he wasn't letting up. I was starting to panic now, realizing I wasn't getting any air, and he picked me up in sort of a headlock position. I was kicking and trying to elbow, and I guess one of the elbows connected to his groin, and we both fell to the ground. He laughed and said, "You got more fight in you than I thought you did. Was just trying to make you pass out, but I didn't even get that far. I'm proud of you." All of my stuff, phone, taser, was in his car on the other side of the lake, so I decided to play along and pretend that it was funny. I told him I needed my inhaler now and to walk me back. He did, surprisingly. I got to his car and I grabbed my taser and my phone while he walked around the back of his car to the driver's side. I texted my mom SOS and to track my location. When I looked up from my phone, I noticed the guy had pulled out his pocket knife. He slowly laid it into the tip of my chest, just enough for it to pierce my skin. He just blankly stared at me, and this went on for about 30 full seconds. I don't know why, but I said, "You're not gonna do it." This seemed to snap him out of it, and he paused, and then let out a hysterical laugh. Between laughs, he got out, "That's the second time I've tried to kill you today." The whole drive home, he proceeded to tell me how he would have raped and mutilated my body if I accidentally died that day. I got home and bolted out of the car. As soon as I did, he sped off. I got a dick pic later that night, and then he blocked me. I looked him up, and it turns out he was actually 27 years old and had a criminal record for domestic violence. That's all I could get on him though. I reported it to the police, but nothing really came of it though. Probably because I wasn't willing to tell my parents what happened. Either way, worst encounter of my life. I live in a regional town of Australia. There is no sex trafficking problem here. It just doesn't exist. There's no gang activity, no unsolved murders, and no missing people or unsolved crimes. Just to give you the laydown of the sort of area I live in. Also, I'm a trans man. I'm pre-T, so I don't often pass as a male, despite me trying to. And that is probably somewhat obvious by my profile picture on Facebook, where I look pretty feminine. Now onto the story. This happened today and I'm still unsure whether I should do anything about it, or if the police would even bother. I flip furniture as a hobby. I like to pick up free or cheap worn out furniture, repair it, repaint it, and then sell it. It keeps my mind occupied. Facebook Marketplace is usually the place where I go to find stuff. So this morning I found a post for a free table. I messaged the person if I could pick it up today. As I'm messaging them, their Facebook profile picture disappeared. I thought that was weird, but maybe they just had changed it. They agreed to the time and sent me the address. No worries, it's on the edge of town. They sent me some random obscure message. "Are you coming alone, or will you have your husband with you?" Okay, I'm not married, and this is slapping me in the face with red flags, but I think maybe the table is heavy and they think I might need help carrying it. I respond with, nah, it's all good, I'll be alright. There's no response back. I have an uneasy feeling that something isn't right with this. Never felt this way before, and don't know why I do now. But I figure that it's in the middle of the day. I've got my phone, and I'm driving there in a safe town. Maybe I'm just overthinking the whole thing. So I hop in my car and I head to the agreed place. I couldn't find the exact address on my GPS, which I thought was odd, but nevertheless, I find the street. There's nothing there. By that I mean, there's a creek that runs by the side of it, empty lots with brushland and tall overgrown grass, a disused isolated somewhat motel, and 3 warehouses. By this stage, I am feeling really off. Everything inside of me is saying, dude, there's something wrong with this whole situation. I'm paying a little more attention to that feeling at this stage, but keep going. 2 of the warehouses had no signage, but there were a couple of cars out in front, and I could tell they're used for a business of some sort. Their address isn't the one I was given though. Even though the motel looked like it hadn't been used in years, I see a mid-40s guy sitting on the steps of one of the units smoking. I think to myself, that is a bit bloody creepy, but maybe he owns the place, and he's doing some kind of work and just taking a break, or maybe he's just a squatter. So I drive down the street a little further to find the last warehouse. The address is where I was meant to pick it up, so it must be it. I start thinking maybe they just got the wrong number. I mean, this place has tall weeds surrounding it, rubbish out in the front, and surely hasn't been used since it was built. I might like free furniture, but I'm not an idiot. I decide I don't want it anymore and message the bloke that I'm sorry, but I couldn't find the place. I got a message back saying, "Are you in the ute? I saw you drive up and down a couple times. Are you alone?" There's no cars or any sign of life at this warehouse, and by now my intuition is screaming at me to get out of there. Yes, I have a ute, but I don't see anyone around. How did they know? I messaged in reply, "Yeah mate, sorry can't find the place, cheers anyway." I get no response for about an hour, no sorry or anything, just, "It's the old motel. You have to get out of your car and walk to the back of reception." That same worn down isolated motel with overgrown weeds that hasn't been used in many years. The same one with a weird guy sitting on the step. I message back, "What are you talking about? The place that hasn't been used in years?" I get no response, nothing. So I head home and sit down for a drink and Google this place again. I had forgotten the exact address, so I go back on Messenger to find it. Except it's gone. So I go back to Facebook Marketplace and the whole ad is gone. It just disappeared as if it didn't happen. What do you all think? Did I just avoid something sinister happening? My gut says I did. Creepy free table guy who was likely planning to do something really bad to an unsuspecting freebie hunter. Let's not meet. For background, I'm a gay man, 32, and live in Southern Oregon. I have a rather large following on Instagram, nature photography, and a large following on Twitter. Having a large follower count, and even sometimes having a modest sized account, you encounter people who push the limits into ranges that are rather inappropriate. I've had my fair share of creeps to push the limit. Most of them don't faze me. It's easy to block people and ignore them as well, and usually after a short period they learn to piss off, except for one guy. I received a message one day from a guy in Colorado. He was 24 or 25, if I remember, and at first he seemed rather nice. He messaged me with the usual, "Hey, how are you doing?" Being a down-to-earth person, I always respond and ask the same. Though, with the amount of messages I receive, I can't continue the conversation with everyone, or I never leave my phone. Though, like I said, I try my best. Usually the messages are friendly, nature-oriented, and the occasional flirt. But after this guy got a reply from me about how I was doing, he jumped right in. "You're really hot. Where do you live? I want to know all about you." I responded in a friendly capacity, telling him thank you and telling him that I'm from the Pacific Northwest, keeping it vague. The conversation then changed even further. I'd like to meet you. When can I meet you? Can we be boyfriends? Then it happened like it always does. How big is your dick? Are you a top or a bottom? Do you like being dominated? Being more interested in personality first, sexuality later, I read his message but didn't respond. I wasn't really interested anyways. I looked over his profile and saw little things that he would post that made me feel like I wouldn't be comfortable talking to him, aside from his clearly strong come-ons. Being this is Twitter, and I didn't respond, I don't believe they send read receipts, and I figured he would just get the hint. A day went by, and then he messaged me a few times, with more live comments. My Twitter is NSFW, so I kind of expect it. I respond to him telling him thanks for the compliments, but didn't answer the questions about my location and such. Again, keeping everything short and vague. He again presses me about where I lived, and that's when I finally stopped responding altogether. After a few days, he messaged me, "Are you ignoring me?" I mean, it was kind of obvious. I wasn't responding, and I was still posting on my social sites. I eventually responded that I didn't feel comfortable with the conversation approach, and that I don't give out my location and such. He responded, clearly rather offended. "Okay, what the fuck ever." So, I blocked him. Later that night, the same day that I had blocked him, I got a message from another account, just random letters from a username with no post. The message went as follows. "Why the fuck did you block me, bitch? I just wanted to get with you. You're a little fucking bitch. Unblock me, or you'll regret that you ever did." I said fuck this noise, and blocked that profile too, without responding. He then, after a while, messaged me on Instagram, and using the email from my Instagram contact button, emails me as well. The messages were along the lines of, "I love you. Unblock me, or you'll regret this. I'm gonna fucking kill myself. Hell, I'll kill you." Again, I reported these messages to Instagram, reported the messages on Twitter, blocked him, took screenshots of the messages, and didn't respond to the email with the same vulgar content. He messaged me from more accounts telling me, "I have all your photos from Instagram and Twitter. I'm gonna use them to catfish people on Grindr. You'll regret ever blocking me." Then he sends me screenshots of several Grindr profiles he created with my photos. I talked to a friend of mine who is an attorney, and he wrote up a legal statement to send to him. "You can't legally use my photos to impersonate me. I will press charges, etc." And I said it to him on yet another profile he was harassing me on. The long legal sounding warning message that he needed to cease his actions immediately. He responded with, "Go ahead, have fun. I'm having fun on Grindr." Then the messages got darker. He messaged me the next day, "I'll kill you. I promise you that." And then another message, "I know where you live," sending me a Google Street photo of my previous address, my grandparents' house. The message continues, "I'll hunt you down. I'll kill you. But first, I'll have some fun with you for a good long time. Then I'll chop you up into little pieces." I had enough. Being a stalker asshole is one thing. Ignoring the warnings to cease impersonating me and threatening me is another thing. I called the local police department from his area, as he tried to use what I assumed to be real photos on his profile, and I was able to find him on Facebook, though it may not have been his real name and the photos, considering he had half a dozen of Facebook profiles with this name and the same photos, but with different info on each, to the tune of "I'm a former Marine" on one, and "I work in the U.S. Marshal Service" on another. Upon contacting the local Colorado Police Department from the area he located himself being from in his messages and his profile, the lady on the line told me that there's not much they can do, as jurisdiction would be the place that the crime was committed in, my state and my area, not where he's committing the crimes from. She told me to contact my local authorities, and good luck. I proceeded to file a police report to my local sheriff's office here in my county in Oregon, but after a few months, have not received a response. Even after calling now, they state their cases are backed up due to COVID. He harassed me for a few more months And I have documented it all, and still to this day I receive dozens of messages of people claiming someone is using my photos to catfish them, literally around the country on Grindr. So back in my early 20s, I moved into my first apartment. I quickly got a roommate, and my naive ass was so excited to finally be starting in on adult life. Now, there were all sorts of sketchy things going on in the apartment building. From a friendly drug dealer across the hall, the frequently reported domestic violence situation going on upstairs, the fistfights in the parking lot, and various other things going on. But the one that I'll always remember was the creepy neighbor down the hall. How this particular building was set up was, all the apartments formed a square around the parking garage that was on the lower level. In the center of the garage there were dumpsters so everyone could just throw away their trash from the balcony outside. It should also be noted that everyone's kitchen windows faced out into the middle, so they were right along the walkway. On more than one occasion, creepy neighbor would lean out his kitchen window and watch my roommate and I while we were leaving. We had to walk right past them to get to the stairs, and he would always ask where we were going, giving us creepy compliments, and sometimes coming up with excuses to invite us into his apartment, like saying he ordered too much pizza, or that he had some furniture that he wanted to sell, and we should come look at it. Sometimes he would just stare intensely and make you want to run past him before he could open up his door or drag you through his window. He also spent a lot of time every day rummaging through the dumpster. Now, I have nothing against dumpster diving. Sometimes you do what you need to survive, but doing it in broad daylight in front of all your neighbors whose trash is in said dumpster is just super creepy. Eventually, he was evicted, but refused to leave. He left a barely legible, all caps, handwritten note on his door saying the landlords did not have permission to enter the apartment and hid whenever they would come around. I remember seeing him dash to the door, grabbing one of the many notices they had left, dashing away again to wherever he spent his days. I still don't know how they finally got him out, but I'm pretty sure he continued to search through the dumpsters after that. I got out of there as soon as my lease ended. I hope he got the help he seriously needed, but I'll never forget how scary that guy was to live near. This is mostly my friend's encounter. My best friend and her sister lived down the road from me when we were kids, 13-ish at the time. They were next door neighbors to a normal enough looking family of 3, husband, wife, and toddler. We saw a lot more of the husband than we ever did of the wife or child. The husband was actually a bit over friendly and would stare during the summer at girls coming and going to the pool. One day, he tells my best friend's sister something along the lines of, "I know this girl your age that's looking for an online pen pal. Here's her username." She befriended the account for a couple days until it became obvious it wasn't the girl she was told it was. He started sending her what she described as gross articles, basically encouraging underage sex and being with someone way older. She showed her dad, and he flipped his lid on their neighbor. That was the end of that. We never saw much of him after that until the day he got arrested, apparently for being in possession of CP. This happened a few years ago, and it still creeps me out to think about. I moved out of my mom's house and got my own apartment after moving to the States for the first time. It looked like a predominantly safe neighborhood. I'm into true crime, so I'm always overly cautious. Anyway, about a few weeks after I moved in, my apartment on the bottom floor flooded because of the washers in the upstairs apartment had been turned on and no one was there to shut it off. I barely unpacked, so I didn't really have anything to catch this water flooding through my ceiling. It was after business hours, and the emergency number was just a reroute to the apartment main line that was closed after hours. I was running around knocking on the doors, hoping that someone would answer so I could grab a bowl or something to hold the water until I could get a hold of someone in the emergency maintenance. The guy directly across from me finally answered, and I frantically explained my situation and asked for a bowl or something. He started to say he didn't have anything until he could literally hear and see the water. He ran back into his place and pulled out a massive plastic storage bin. We rotated on switching out the bins of water until Rainbow showed up to save the day. My living room and kitchen were soaked, but my place was still livable. I told the guy thank you, then was going back until he stopped me and invited me to stay in his place for the night. I told him it wasn't necessary, my place was okay, and he insisted. He claimed he was getting ready to go to work, but he went back into his apartment, grabbed the keys, cleaned off his couch and his bed, and said I could stay there for the night, and he'll come in the back door at 3 a.m. He wasn't giving up, so I took the key. Until he left, then I returned his bin and the key and went back to my apartment and avoided this dude like the plague. Red flag 1. A couple weeks later, I take out my dog to go potty. I could hear this neighbor's door open and close, so I would try to time it safely to avoid him. Unfortunately, it seemed like he was doing the same to me. As I open my door, and he happens to be leaving at the same time to try to talk, he stops me and starts talking about my family, if I'm from here, if I have family close. Red flag number 2. After about 6 months of bobbing and weaving this weirdo, I take my dog out before bed to go potty. I would purposely walk around the back in order to avoid walking in front of this guy's apartment window, who now had the blinds open all the time, just to avoid him seeing me. I get out, walk around the back, and just have an eerie feeling that someone's watching me. I look behind me, and I see this guy peering around the corner, just staring at me. He notices me notice him, and goes back, and I hear the door close. I start second guessing if I locked my door. I locked it every time I left. I go back, check my door, and head back out the same way. Take my dog out for 10 minutes, walk home, and I can hear his door and keys as I'm about to approach my door. I hide around the side, waiting him out. I hear his door close, but he doesn't leave. He's just standing there jiggling his keys. It's cold out and my puppy is freezing. I decide to take my chances and go to my door. As soon as I walk out, he's standing there and says, "Oh, sorry about earlier. Thought I saw someone walk by." Keep in mind, I walked in the back purposely to avoid him noticing me. I quickly said okay, went inside my place. It clicked. There's no way he could have known when I took my dog out and came back home, unless he was peeping through the peephole and saw me. That was the last straw and red flag flashing in spotlights. I finally emailed management, sending them the complaint and explained everything I just did. Within the next few weeks, the dude moved out without a blink of an eye. I've had many creepy encounters like this, so stay tuned. Just be aware and listen to your gut. Back in 2007, I was taking a walk with my boyfriend down to my neighborhood park. I can't exactly remember how late in the evening it was, but it was dark out, probably around 8 or 9 p.m. The park is at the end of a cul-de-sac, and it backs up to a small wooded area and a creek. As we are getting closer to the park, we start hearing very unusual and loud sounds that were like a snarling, screeching ape. We figured it was just a coyote or a fox or something and continued towards the swing set area at the park. We sat down at a bench facing the wooded area when we started to hear those noises again and branches snapping. In the direction of the noises, we saw a treetop violently shaking as if a huge animal was on it, but we couldn't see a figure or anything at all. It was as if what we were looking at was an invisible force. I wanted to take a closer look, but my boyfriend pulled me away, and we started walking back towards the street. We stopped under the streetlight and listened some more. Then we watched the trees motion jump from the trees behind the swing to a completely different side of the park. A different treetop was shaking, and we could hear the branches snapping and the weird animal noises coming from it. Never thought I would share this experience. I'll always wonder what it was. This happened in Grindstone, Pennsylvania, back in the 90s. I was probably around 8 years old, and my brother was about 5-ish. We lived on a couple acres in the country, with a farm on one side and your basic farm fencing with a thick forest on the other side. With growing up in the sticks and Dad being an avid hunter, us kids were taught to be aware of our surroundings and wild animals, things like that. Also, we were taught never to wander off without telling an adult, not to trust strangers, the normal safety stuff kids are taught. Anyways, as a kid, I thought the woods were creepy and scary. There was no way in hell I would go into them by myself. So I was playing outside with my little brother, and he went into the house. There I was by myself when I heard my mom calling for me.
Kimberly, come here. Kimberly, over here. Come here, Kimmy.
This was a little weird to me because why would my mom be in the woods right now? I climbed over the fence anyways and started walking towards my mom's voice. Then out of the blue, I felt like I was being watched and got this bad feeling. I started to wonder how my mom got into the woods without going past me. Thoughts like that. So I turned quickly and ran back to the house where I found my mom at the kitchen table and my brother playing video games in the living room. I then asked her if she called for me, and she said no, and asked me why. I told her what happened. This led to us being told to stay inside and play inside for the rest of the day. I'm now in my early 30s, and I've asked my mom about this incident, and she still swears that she never called for me. There's something about this situation that still really bothers me to this day. Hey all, I'm not going to provide the exact location for this, as this happened on the trail that my mom and I walked the dog on every day for the last 10 years. It was pretty close to our home. I live in a rural area of the Pacific Northwest, and so there are a lot of trails just outside of town that bordered on a lot of forest. This was one of those, but it was probably the biggest trail in my town. It was actually an access road to some stuff, so it was about 10 feet wide and gravel. At the time I briefly went missing, I was about 10 years old, and I had walked the trail every single day for 3 to 4 years. My mom was with me, as was our dog, an 85-pound Rottweiler Lab mix. I had been warned not to go off the trail and wouldn't have normally, but there was a small sub-trail that had a rope swing over a creek. I loved to play there as a kid, and that day I crossed the creek on a fallen tree bridge to hang out on the side while my mom talked to her friend that she ran into. I was within sight of my mom, a clear view across the creek, when all of a sudden it was like things swirled. My surroundings were completely unfamiliar, and there were plants that shouldn't have been there. The wrong kind of trees, with the leaves at slightly the wrong point of the season. Of course, I knew what to do if I got lost. I hugged a tree and shouted for my mom. I was probably 300 yards away at the time, at the absolute most. She should have heard me, but she didn't. I wasn't there for very long before our dog came and got me. He wasn't a very smart dog. With all love, saying he was dumb as a bag of rocks would have been an insult to the rocks. He also didn't like me nearly as much as he liked my mom. Total mama's boy, and would have stayed near her, but he calmly walked up to me, nuzzled my hand so it was on his head, and walked me back to the creek where I could see my mom. I thought I'd been gone for 15 minutes or so, but apparently it had been an hour plus, and multiple people were looking for me, including walking directly on the path I had never left. I'm not sure if this is the right place, but I've held this story in for the last 6 years because it sounds crazy, and I got told not to talk about it. I went camping 6 years ago with a now ex-boyfriend of mine. The campsite we picked was beautiful. We were able to drive up through some small trails. The spot we picked was next to a hiking trail that weren't very far from the natural hot springs and a huge waterfall. We were in the middle of nowhere. Absolutely no one was around us. We set up our camp next to the car, went hiking, soaked in the hot springs, came back and had dinner. It was all very normal until we woke up the next day. I need to give some context of how we slept that night so you can understand my confusion. Before we went to sleep, I put our food cooler and stereo that we had brought into the car and locked it. I put the keys in my front pocket of my backpack and put the backpack next to my sleeping bag on the far side of the tent, away from the door of the tent. My boyfriend at the time slept nearest to the door of the tent with his gun next to him. We woke up in the morning and I felt fine. I slept hard from the inside of the tent and everything seemed normal. When we got out, our campsite was absolute chaos. The fire pit we had made was ruined. The cooler had been thrown and the food was scattered all over the place. The stereo was smashed to pieces laying next to a tree. All the car doors were open, including the trunk. We stood there for a minute, in silence, just taking everything in. The woods felt off now. It was quiet, and not the beautiful campsite that we saw yesterday. Everything about those woods felt wrong now. My ex accused me of not locking the car doors the night before, and that an animal had got to our stuff. I promised that I locked it, and went in the tent to grab the keys from my backpack, but they weren't there. I found them later on the ground right next to the car. We quickly threw everything into the trunk and left. My boyfriend was quiet and wouldn't talk to me about what just happened. He finally spoke when we were almost home and told me that he had a dream the night before about someone kneeling over him in the tent, holding his gun, and just staring at him. When I tried to ask him more questions, he got quiet again and said he didn't want to talk about it and that we shouldn't talk about it anymore either. I try to forget about it, but I just can't. Something really wrong happened to us in the woods that night. This is the craziest UFO phenomena, true story, and it came from my dad. 1960s in Ethiopia. My dad is just a child, 9 years old, at the time playing with his best friend, Gabriel, after school. They were playing in the fenced-off backyard of my dad's house. My dad turns his back for a second and turns back to look at his friend, but his friend Gabriel is gone. It's important to note that my dad and Gabriel were from the top 1% of Ethiopia's ruling elite. My dad's father was the Minister of Interior of Ethiopia, and Gabriel's father was a 4-star general. The backyard Gabriel disappeared from had a 10-foot brick wall with armed guards patrolling on the outside. A couple hours pass. His parents, my dad's parents, and the guards are searching for him, but no sight of Gabriel. 48 hours pass. Now there's a nationwide search for this important general's kid. It's on the news. Police are also searching door to door, describing him and what he was wearing when he disappeared. He was wearing his private school uniform, white shirt, brown pants. Helicopters even searched the countryside, looking for him. Still nothing. A month passes, and then 2, then 4. People start losing hope that he would ever be found, and start thinking the worst. Exactly 6 months to the day that he disappeared, Gabriel appears back in my dad's backyard. He is wearing the same white shirt and private school uniform, and it was still clean. He looked exactly the same as he did when he disappeared. This is where it starts getting weird. Once they confirmed he was okay, they started asking him where he'd been. He said a couple of nice men took him on a trip. He was in a white room that glowed, and other children were there from different countries. He said he was surprised that the nice men, who looked like white guys, could speak Ethiopian, and he could understand what the other children were saying, even though they weren't speaking Ethiopian. The white glowing room had no windows. The doors disappeared into the walls. There's buttons on the walls, and if the kids pushed them, beds would come out of the walls. He said he was then all of a sudden in a city that was glowing, clean. The cars were flying around him. He said there was people there, but they looked strange. Like us, but different. One nice man was still with him and took him to a tall building where he had to stay for a while, but showed him a room that he could use for entertainment. Gabriel said he could push a button and the room itself goes places. An open field, the beach, the room itself even flies. He said after a couple hours he was taken back to Ethiopia and appeared in the backyard. He thought he had only been gone for a couple hours. No one believed him, and Ethiopia being a super religious country, most adults around him thought that he was possessed by the devil. Gabriel even was forced to see priests to get the evil spirits out of him. My dad still keeps in contact with him. Gabriel's got a doctorate in physics, and I believe works in Holland still. I lived in Alberta, and when I first moved there, April 2008, until he moved 2010, we had a neighbor who was the bane of our existence. It all started when I was taking the garbage out to the bin. On my way back, I happened to look up and saw, no word of a lie, 9 cameras in this man's backyard. He had one above the back door, one on the railing of the back steps, one on a pole by the back steps, one on a receiver for a satellite, one on the back gate, 3 on his fence, and one in the upstairs window. Now the amount kind of creeped me out, but what really creeped me out was that 5 out of the 9 cameras were pointed at my backyard. Oh, did I forget to mention? I have 3 young children. Well, I pointed this out to my husband and he called the landlord right away, who then called the cops, and they all went there and told him to remove the cameras that were facing my yard. Then the trouble really started. He killed 2 of my cats, threw a dead skunk in my backyard, yelled at my kids for playing, and threatened to kill one of the cats in front of my kids, then had the audacity to call the cops on my husband for yelling at him. Not long after, the cops came to our house and put a verbal peace bond on us. I was asleep on the couch due to having a broken arm. I turned off the light and settled in, waiting for the Advil to kick in, when I look out my living room window, and who should I see there? My creeper of a neighbor. I screamed, and Morgan came running downstairs. By this time, my neighbor had already ran back to his place. He finally moved out in 2010 when he realized that you couldn't get rid of us, and shortly after we had a fire in our townhouse and had to move into his old unit. We found out why he had all those cameras. We were moving some stuff downstairs and saw he had built a room. He had a growing operation for marijuana in his basement that no one knew about. I now live on an acreage, and I'm happy not to be there anymore. I know a lot of people are going to say this is fake, but I swear it's not. I got my best friend as a witness. This happened a few years ago when I was about 13. I'm 5'7" and about 125 pounds, so I'm pretty small, but I usually have pepper spray and a pocket knife on me. I'm embarrassed to say though, that in the excitement of exploration with my best friends, I forgot my pepper spray and knife. I love to explore and travel even, or especially go to places I'm not allowed. So when I moved in, of course, one of the first places I explored was the train tracks. I had my best friend come over one day to explore the neighborhood with me, and we decided the train tracks was a perfect place to explore. We were walking for about an hour or 2, but it was still light outside, and we had just passed a small neighborhood street, so we felt safe. But when I turned around to throw a stick, I saw 5 hooded figures following us from about 20 feet away. I tried to pretend I didn't see them and just told my friend calmly. We decided to look at them straight on and see what they would do. Once we looked at them, they stopped. So did my friend and I. We stared at each other for a few seconds, but it felt like hours. Finally, they made their move. 3 of them went to the left and 2 of them went to the right. When we heard the sounds of the loud and fast footsteps, we finally snapped out of our trance and ran as fast as we could. We were both in cross country, and we were being held together by adrenaline, so we were able to run faster than we ever had before. Luckily, because I explored those same tracks alone a few days before, I knew that if we ran a half mile, we would be on a bridge above a small neighborhood. We somehow made it. No clue if we were still being followed or not. But out of fear, we jumped off about 10 feet down and kept running into the neighborhood until we finally saw other people. Then we slowly walked home, shaking and exhausted. Looking back, I regret not telling my parents, but I was scared that they would not let me explore alone anymore. But I didn't go back to those train tracks, and I never will. This happened to me about 6 months ago. My boyfriend at the time and I were sitting in the living room of my apartment when we heard a knock on the door. He asked if I was expecting anyone, and I said no, but I would take a look just in case to see who was out there. He stayed on the couch while I looked through the peephole. The apartment was set up in a way that it didn't allow him to see from the living room to the front door. Outside there were 2 people. One, an African American man, looked about mid-20s, and a much older Asian woman who looked to be in her 60s. For whatever reason, I decided to open the door. When I opened it, the young man said, "Hi, we are part of so-and-so religion, and we would like to talk to you about it." I have a 50-pound dog who was trying to get outside, so I said, "Sure, hold on, I'll come outside because my dog is trying to get out." This is a huge mistake. I want to clarify that this was very out of character for me. However, I recently became closer to God and was wanting to give these people a chance, as I didn't believe any harm would come of it just by listening to what they had to say. I step outside and close the door behind me and listen to them. They said something about how they prayed to Mary instead of God because she was the one who birthed Jesus. I don't exactly remember, but it was something like that. I thanked them for their time and then said something like, "But thank you guys, stay safe out there." The Asian woman visibly starts panicking and says things that I don't understand in a different language. When I look at her partner to see what he has to say about her behavior, he says, "No problem, maybe you want a pamphlet though." I reply, yeah, sure," not wanting to be rude and also to do some research on the religion as I never heard of it before. The guy then says, "Okay, great, we have them in the car, you can come with us, we're parked right in the front." This is when I start to feel weird. I lived on the 3rd story of the apartment complex and was not really the best, and there were no security cameras anywhere. Why would you leave the pamphlets in the car? If they're going door to door, it wouldn't make much sense to have each person they intrigued come down to the car. The woman grabbed my arm and started directing me to the stairs. In a split second I yelled, "You know what? I'm a Christian and very happy in my faith, but thank you both anyways." The woman said something in her language again that I didn't understand, and the man goes, "Are you sure? We can get it to you fast, we're parked right there." That my heart generally sank into my butt. I started sweating and looking for ways to remove myself from her grasp and the situation entirely. I know I must have looked panicked, and I was. What do I do? How do I get away from the immediate danger I just put myself in? I was thinking and just blurted out that I was sure, yanked my arm away from the woman who ended up scratching me in her grasp, and bolted inside. I locked the door behind me and told my boyfriend what happened. That's when he looked at me with a face I'd never seen before in my life. He tells me about this religion that has been on the news for the last week because women have been going missing, and the one thing they have in common is some of their neighbors saying that they had been solicited by the group the same day or around the day of the neighbor's disappearance. I read some articles to fact check what he was saying, and he was right. The police were saying it might be in connection to a sex trafficking ring that was moving from neighborhood cities and now were suspected to be in ours. It gets weirder somehow. I seriously freaked out and went straight to Facebook Live to share with my friends because I wanted to warn whoever I could. I set the privacy to public after the live ended and went on with my life, still a bit shaken, but I was fine. 1 week later, I get a Facebook message from someone who is, I'm assuming, part of the religious group, telling me that I needed to take the post down, and they were not nice about it. After I said I wouldn't, because I wanted to educate anyone who lives in the town, she told me I was a spoiled egg and I would regret making that video. I was scared and blocked her immediately, set the video to private, and called the police. The police said they couldn't do much about it, as I didn't have a make or model of the car that they were in, so there's no proof that they had came to my apartment or who it was. Here's the part that still freaks me out. When I went to show them the Facebook messages, I went to unblock the lady and her page was completely deleted. I still had the messages, but it was like I was talking to a little gray default profile picture. Even the name changed to something that seemed to be random clicks on the keyboard. I want to end this by saying I'm working on not being such a trusting idiot with people. I know things I should have done differently and still get upset with myself of how stupid I acted. And so to the religious group or sex trafficking pair that showed up at my door and the Facebook lady, whatever your motives were, let's not meet again. I don't know how to start this gracefully, so here goes, or for sure if it belongs here, but it's downright creepy. I'm getting on a train to head home on the afternoon of October the 1st, 2019. About an hour's journey. The train is nearly full, and probably a few minutes after getting to my seat, a young woman, about my age, early 20s, sits next to me, probably due to the lack of space. For the first 30 minutes, it's uneventful, with no interaction between us. An elderly couple gets on the train, and she offers to give up her seat. I offer to do the same so they can both sit. The elderly couple thanks us for the offer, but declines and sits on the stairs. It's a double-deck train. I get up to go to the bathroom and return a minute later. She has moved into the window seat, where I sat, and offered it back to me. I said it wasn't necessary, but she moved back into her original spot anyways, and I sat back down in my window seat. She then uses this as a pretense to start a conversation with me and complimenting me on my willingness to give up my seat alongside her. We then begin to talk about our respective days, innocent enough. I was at a convention for my job, and she was heading up to visit family and claimed to have lived in the area in the past. I know this was only a few days ago, but my memory is really shot due to unrelated mental health issues I have in my life right now, so this might not be perfectly accurate, but it goes something like this. She ends up asking me where I was getting off. I tell her. She says she's also getting off there and asks how long until we arrive. I should have noticed this as a possible red flag in hindsight, but it could just be a coincidence or not familiar with the area anymore, as there was only a handful of stations the train stops at. I gave her my guess and told her I usually don't catch the train myself, so it might not be perfect. We kept talking about relatively innocuous stuff. We exchanged names. I won't mention names out of respect for her identity, regardless. She eventually asked where I worked. I told her I worked as a computer technician at a school. I work at a Catholic school, a detail I mentioned. She uses that as a pretense, as a way into religion. She asked me if I participate in any religious functions at the school, Mass, Holy Communion, etc. And I tell her I don't actively participate in them and that I'm not religious. As I tell her I'm religiously agnostic, leaning towards atheism, a detail I didn't mention. But I also mentioned that I was raised Catholic and went to Catholic secondary school. She then claims to be agnostic herself a few years ago until she found Jesus and led him into her heart, which she claims has been helpful with a lot of her mental issues that she was having. At this point, I'm just curious about her story. I will generally humor anyone, as I like to hear about people's experiences and point of views, as long as it's not directly hostile to a group of people. Knowing what I know now, I probably wouldn't have. I listened to her harp on about it, while she occasionally asked questions about me, like what worries me about life in general. During this, she gives me a pamphlet, and we continue discussing until I have to interrupt her. As we approach the station we are meant to get off at, she asked me to do a prayer on the bottom left of the front page of the pamphlet. I oblige her, and do it partially out of curiosity, as I haven't done it in a long time. Before we part ways, she asked me for my email. I tell her and she types it into her phone. I don't know why I did this, maybe because I hate disappointing people, or was curious, I don't know. I make poor decisions in my current mental state. We then hugged, and part ways. On the 4th of October 2019, I get the following email. This reminded me about the encounter. Having already read the pamphlet, I read it again, and I see the website mentioned on the back. After a little digging on the web, I noticed the website on the pamphlet, and it's affiliated with the Family International, a religious cult that sexually abuses children, and a whole lot of other things. I was just in shock and disbelief. I was questioning whether to reply to her email and quiz her about it. If I do, I'll update this post, but I'm kinda scared as she's emailing me contacting my full name. But holy fuck, it's like she's trying to recruit me to this crazy cult. I'll be glad to not cross paths with her ever again. A little over 3 months ago, a man knocked on our door while it was just myself and my son home alone. I was working from home at the time, so my attentions were scattered between my son and my other responsibilities. It was in the middle of the day, so a knock on the door didn't appear suspicious, although it was definitely unexpected. Anyone who knows us will call us before arriving. Assuming it was one of our neighbors, I opened the door to a man that I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, slender, about 5'10", graying hair covered with a beanie, with worn jeans and a dusty jacket. "Hi, I'm Tom from Thomas Ministries. Wonder if you could use any prayer today." I'm a nice person, not one to rudely chase people off the doorstep without a reasonable cause. So I kindly declined, and he went on his way. I watched out the window as he walked down the street, not stopping at another single house on the block. Seeing as we were the only house with the car in the driveway, I didn't think much of him picking our door to knock on. Fast forward a few months to last night around midnight. My husband is a night owl and is often up to 2 a.m. or so. Me and the toddler are fast asleep in our beds. Out of nowhere, the doorbell rings, and then there's a knock on the door. Our dog barks, and I wake up. Our bedroom is just off the living room, so I was able to lie there and listen to my husband as he opens the door. I overhear him telling the midnight stranger that we have a God, we're not interested, and to leave, in a much more stern and aggressive tone than I am capable of. After the door shuts, my husband enters the room a few seconds later and describes the interaction to me. The description and interaction matches the exact man I encountered a few months earlier, except this time it's midnight, and there's no ministry on this planet that would encourage door-to-door ministry in the dead of the night. My husband watches the man do the same thing as before, walk down the street, not knocking on a single door in sight. Now, I feel it's important to acknowledge the lack of judgment on our part. The door should have never been opened. We should have called 911 non-emergency and reported it. This was a mistake, and fortunately for us, it wasn't a deadly one. Lesson learned 1,000 times over, and mistakes will not be repeated. Our house is protected, and we are even more prepared. I sincerely hope that we do not encounter this man again. Thoughts of the East Area Rapist and Night Stalker documentary swarm my head, and I think how easily things could have gone wrong. How easy it would have been for us to look past this and not recognize the sign of danger. Given that the first time he knocked, it was just myself that answered, I can't help but wonder why he picked his house again to knock at in the middle of the night. I would like to think it's just a mental illness, but you never really know until you know, and I hope and pray that we never have a chance to. Not the craziest story, but true. So about 1.5 years ago, I went on a school trip to New York. We tried to minimize every cost, so we stayed in hostels. They were pretty nice, to be fair. One day we come back and we're huddled around the courtyard kind of section in front to get a debrief on the following day. There were 30 of us kids and 3 teachers. The lead teacher stood on a bench as she addressed us. This tall man was walking past and joined the back of our group. A few of the boys noticed and pointed it out. We had gotten a few questions from people on the trip about who we were, so we didn't find it weird at all at first. The man then saw my teacher staring and blurted out, "You're so beautiful." She was flattered but a little confused. He remained there as if he joined us. It was super weird. He kept complimenting her. As we filed into the lobby, he followed us. One teacher flagged one of the staff and he kindly stepped in. "Hi, what room are you in?" Yeah, 3. As he tried to pass him. 3? What floor? What section? I lost my key. He runs past him and continues to follow our group. We were going to the basement to use the kitchen, so it was definitely not a coincidence. He just kept politely getting escorted away by the staff, but kept coming back. Our teacher told us to go to our rooms, so I don't know what happened after. It doesn't sound that crazy, but it was just super creepy. So it was early 2020, and I was on a trip with my friend in London. We're two 22-year-old girls and just wanted to spend the weekend looking around the galleries and getting to feel the city as we were thinking of moving there. We were staying in kind of a dingy hostel in East London, but we were barely ever there. We stumbled in late at night after being out most nights. We were in a shared room with two other sets of bunk beds. Most nights we weren't really aware of any others being in the room, other than the odd snorer who was gone by morning. But our last night, a new person had arrived. We noticed he laid out his clothes neatly on the bed, and all his shoes were lined up perfectly against the wall. He was sleeping under the duvet, despite his clothes being left on the top of the bed. Almost like he heard us coming up and jumped into bed before we came into the room. The lights were on too. We were both pretty drunk, so didn't take much notice and went to sleep ourselves. The next morning we were flying home on a really early flight, like 6 a.m. When we woke up around 3:30 a.m., he was already awake, and while we were both getting our things together, we noticed that he was taking his stuff out of this bag methodically, in a really particular order. He was muttering under his breath, but wasn't saying anything that we could make out, but kept laughing to himself and got progressively louder. We both texted back and forth about how odd he seemed to be, but we were leaving soon, so we weren't too worried about it. I walked into the bathroom to brush my teeth, the door slightly ajar. My friend was directly outside finishing up her makeup, so I didn't see the point of shutting the door and locking it just to brush my teeth. Seconds after I walked in, he walks in. I froze, but then I thought I should act as normal as possible, instead of reacting or freaking out, as that might cause him to lash out, and I could already tell that he wasn't totally normal. While I'm standing there brushing my teeth, he stares into the mirror at himself for about 20 seconds, almost glaring at himself. He seemed angry. He started grinding his teeth and grunting too. Then he switched and tapped on and started flinging water at his face, most of it flying behind him or down his clothes. He kept making grunting sounds, and they were getting louder. Bear in mind, I was about 2 feet away from him brushing my teeth. I completely freak out and swallow my toothpaste without rinsing and walk out the bathroom. My friend was sat outside, her eyes wide, and she was shaking. She said when I walked into the bathroom, he stopped what he was doing, stared at my friend, smiled really creepily, and then walked in after me, keeping eye contact with her, which was odd because he never tried to make eye contact with me. We grabbed our stuff and ran downstairs. At first, I was tired and I didn't fully process how weird it was, but looking back, it could have been really dangerous and was definitely very weird. Creepy man who decided to join me in the bathroom, I hope I never see you again. This happened back in the spring of 2007 when my buddy and I were doing a month-long backpacking trip across Europe. We had started in London and took every imaginable mode of transportation through France, the Netherlands, Germany, and finally ended our trip in Italy. Due to a bus delay, we arrived in Rome several hours later than scheduled. The folks at the hostel said they assumed that we weren't going to show up and rented our beds to other travelers. Not to worry, they told us. There was a spillover property across the city they rented out for such occasions. This was a 2-bedroom apartment with several bunk beds packed into the rooms. Here, we spent our last 3 nights in Europe, along with a group of young Spaniards we ended up going clubbing with and having a blast. On our last day, our Spaniard friends left and were replaced with a large group of 10 Latin American men and 1 woman that we met briefly before heading out on our final night in Rome. There was a bit of a language barrier, but everyone seemed nice, and we headed out separately. My friend and I got back to our bunks around 2 a.m., and about an hour later, the other group stumbled in, clearly pretty drunk. They all got into their bunks, and within 15 minutes the lights were out, and they were snoring away. All but one. One of the young men on the upper bunk directly across from me was still awake, seemingly playing with his phone. My eyes were shut and I started to drift off to sleep just as a bright light hit me directly in the face and I heard the shutter click sound on his camera phone. Annoyed but not wanting to be confrontational, I turned my back, facing away, hoping he would just go to bed. Instead, he continued taking photos of me whispering obscenities in English that I won't repeat here. I realized that being passive was the wrong strategy when he got down off his bunk and crept over to mine. For a few moments he just stood over me, apparently with his hands on the upper bunk where my traveling companion slept. At one point, my heart rate was going through the roof and I quickly started considering my options. A cold realization suddenly hit me. We were in a private apartment with no other travelers or staff in the building. If I confronted this person, he might awake his companions. I have no idea whether these men are dangerous, and if they were, we might be in the fight for our lives. If they were so inclined, they could probably kill us and just say that we left on schedule, and we would never be heard from again. I was thinking of kicking the dude in the stomach and bolting to the kitchen to grab a knife when he suddenly knelt down and reached into my bed. That was it. I sat up sharply and got right in his face, asking, "You fucking need something, dude?" As menacing as I could. He froze. Without saying a word, he got up and walked into the common area. I heard the bathroom door shut. After a minute later, he got back in his bunk, and 10 minutes after that, he too was snoring peacefully. I was wide awake, fully dressed and ready to battle for the rest of the night. Shortly before dawn, I woke up my friend and we got out of there. He did ask, "What was that guy doing last night?" But I have no idea how he was aware of the whole thing. We were on our flight to Heathrow a couple hours later, and we never discussed it since. So yeah, creepy photographer dude, if I see you in public, you might meet these hands. This happened in the summer of 2018. I was 22, and that summer I was lucky enough to get a summer internship in London and found a dorm-type housing situation. The company generously provided a housing stipend to all the interns who were traveling a certain distance from home. So keep in mind, my job is paying for this. The building I lived in was Green Lines and was meant for people that were in London short term, typically students. You can pay rent week by week. They provide both suites, private restrooms, and a shared kitchen, which is what I had, as well as just rooms without bathrooms. The following details are how the building was set up and are kind of important, so please bear with me. To get into the building, you had just one key card, which unlocked the entrance of the building, your hallway, as well as a suite or bedroom, but not any other hallway. To get into the building, you had to enter a metal gate from the street with a key card onto the property, which also included a little backyard and bike racks. Then use the key card again to enter the actual building. You would use it again for the elevator. Go to your floor, swipe into your hallway, then swipe into your room. With all that out of the way, I could proceed to the actual creepy encounter. So I had been living there for about 3 weeks, and even made a great friend from India who was in London doing a 6-month pastry course at some hotshot baking school. Me and her hit it off the second we met. We'll call her Priya. She and I, as well as a 30-year-old man from Spain in London on some marketing training course his company was paying for, made a ritual of gathering each night to smoke, drink wine, watch the World Cup, and generally chill because we had a really great trio formed. They're both great people. So the night this all went down was just like any other. I came home from work, got off the bus on my block, and was approaching the first metal gate to my hostel. Standing there was this man, about 30 to 35 years old, with very unique hair. I'd never seen him before, but people came and went all the time in this place. He was fiddling with a magnetic key card, just like mine. I knew he belonged there because the keys had the building's logo printed on them, so I could tell that it was, in fact, just his keycard's magnetic strip malfunctioning. I said hello and introduced myself, and helped him inside. I, as a woman, am cursed with a very friendly and sunny disposition. I'm very easy to talk to. I find something in common with almost anyone, which often led me to men I've rejected cursing me out for leading them on by having been nice to them. This guy starts to flirt with me right away, and I drop casually that I have a boyfriend. He asked for my number, and my stupid ass actually gave it to him, because I figured he just moved there. He seems nice. We have a pretty great evening squad I chill with, and figured maybe it would be nice to invite him down for a smoke with Priya, our Spanish friend, and I, in the evenings. Because I'm the type of person to think, oh, if he's living here, he's probably new to London and knows no one, like all of us when we got here. Only thing is, and this is embarrassing and hilarious, except for my own phone number, I only know one other by heart, my mother's. So literally, without thinking, when I was asked for my number, I recited my mom's phone number on reflexes and didn't realize it until about 10 minutes later when I got back to my room and my mom calls me frantic, screaming, "Who are you giving my number to over there?" And instantly, I understood what just happened and was like, "Oh, my bad, Mom. I did the phone number thing again." To which she responds, "That's good and fine, but whoever the fuck he is, you need to stay the fuck away from him." So essentially, he started texting my mom as though it was me, naturally, and she understood what was up right away and nicely replied, "Oh, I'm sorry, this has happened before. This is not Elle's number, but her mother's. But here's hers." And he started sending her voice memos on WhatsApp screaming, like, "What kind of fucking games are you playing with me?" Aggressive as shit. So I texted him explaining my mistake and how no one was playing games with his ass and to watch his fucking mouth. Basically, once he realizes I'm not trying to play games with him or whatever, he goes back to being a gentleman, by which I mean immediately asking me to come check me, which I assume is British slang for see me in my room. So at this point, I don't mess with this dude because of how aggressive his reaction was. I'm not gonna hang out with him or invite him to meet my friends. So I politely declined, saying I'm not trying to have anyone in my room, and that's when he starts demanding to know my hallway and room number. At this point, I'm pretty freaked out, because all women know men are fucking scary. Thank God, his keycard doesn't have access to my hallway, even if he knew which one I was in. After realizing I'm not gonna tell him, and also realizing that he creeped me the fuck out, meaning we will not get to hang out, he started to literally threaten me, sending voice memos on WhatsApp, screaming on the top of his lungs that I'ma see you next Tuesday, and a stupid bitch, and that he'll literally fucking kill me. Mind you, it has been about 30 minutes at this point since I met this man. He also sent me death threats the following day around 10 a.m. I did the only thing I could, which was to immediately contact Hostel management and report this. I provided them with all the screenshots and voice memos, and there was no arguing. They kicked him out by the very next morning, and also told me that the police were involved, though no one ever spoke to me about it. I assumed they didn't have to, as management had screenshots and voice memos to show them. I was told that police came around 9 in the morning. That timestamp made me realize he sent me the threats this morning after the police spoke to him. He's mad that I called the cops, and he seemed pretty crazy, so I was afraid. I went to work the next morning and told my boss what happened. She was a wonderful boss and mentor, so I was telling her because I was shaken up more than anything. I'm extremely happy that I did talk to her though, because she waited for me to finish talking and wide-eyed said, "You're not staying another minute at that place." Because she was thinking what I was thinking. Was to stop the creep from waiting for me outside the front gates one of those days and attacking me. I can't thank her enough because she came home with me and packed all my things straight from work and rented a comfortable hotel for 3 nights, for which she generously paid out of pocket because she wasn't really allowed to put it on the company card. Within that 3 days, she helped me find a nice Airbnb apartment that I shared with a very nice roommate for the remainder of my time in London. And it actually ended up being cheaper than the hostel, unbelievably, because the hostel was in Green Lanes, and this flat was about a 3-minute walk from the Old Saint station. I was so thankful for her amazing initiative, but was sad to leave my hostel friends and nightly routine behind so suddenly. All this shit went down within 12 hours. In the following weeks, Pariah did in fact see this guy lurking around the building several times, as he was easy to spot with his aforementioned very unique hair. I thank my lucky stars that I never had the chance to introduce them, because who knows if he would have targeted her in lieu of me once I moved, because he knew we were friends. I'm very lucky to have the incredible boss I had, who went above and beyond to keep me safe. Let me just preface this story as to why I was traveling alone. So, one of my best friends, Kayla, and I worked seasonally at a hiking lodge in the BC for the summer. We were both girls in our early 20s. She lives and goes to school in New Brunswick, and I live and work as a chef in Toronto for the winter. We decided this year, as I bought a new car, instead of flying back home, we would do an epic Canadian coast-to-coast road trip. Everything was going wonderfully, so wonderfully in fact. We ended up staying longer in a few unexpected places and had to cut our East Coast portion of the trip a little short. Now my friend Kayla started her schooling on November 1st, so I dropped her at home in New Brunswick on Halloween and stayed there at her place. I was planning to head to Toronto the next day. After a few glasses of Chardonnay and some laughs, I decided I couldn't come this close to the East Coast and not see the Cabot Trail in Nova Scotia, something that had been on my bucket list for years. So knowing that I still had a week more of vacation before my winter contract, I hastily booked a hostel for the next day, November 1st, at the MacLeod Hostel on the Cabot Trails. When I booked, only one option came up. I assumed, because I waited till the last minute to book, it was a private dorm with a queen-size bed for $35. I thought, what a bargain, and booked immediately. I left Kayla's house at 7 a.m., knowing it was a long drive. Now the Cabot Trail is roughly 150 kilometers long, so I thought to be safe, I plugged the hostel address into my Google Maps and headed straight there to get my bearings. I would arrive at the hostel roughly around noon, and knowing that was too early to check in, I figured I would consult with the front desk to figure out nearby hiking trails and bring my bags in later. I was about to arrive to my hostel, according to Google, but all around me was nothing but farmland. Google instructed me, the destination is on your left. I saw nothing. About 50 yards up the road, I saw a wire bar bent to look like an A that was sprayed paint bright red. I was staying at the MacLeod Hostel, so I guessed that might be the place, and I followed the dirt road. It led me to what I can only describe as a dilapidated barn, no signage. There were 2 cars parked up front, so I parked alongside them and got out of my car and tried to figure out where I was. Once I got out, a smallish man, around mid-40s with dark hair and intense eyes, popped out of the barn. He asked me if I was staying with them tonight. I said yes. He asked why I booked so last minute, and I explained to him my situation. Seeming satisfied with my answer, he insisted on taking me on the grand tour of the barn. The first thing I noticed that the entirety of the barn had been dug out around the foundation, about 5 feet deep and 3 feet around. He led me across some particle board laid down as some sort of ramp leading inside. The second thing I noticed about the property is that there's no windows. This was clearly a barn meant for livestock. The gentleman leading me on this tour was named Kevin, the owner. He proceeds to tell me about his grand plans for the space. It all seemed pretty far-fetched, as it was just a big barn with particle board separating most of the rooms. He led me up the skeleton stairs made of plywood and 2x4s to a cabin loft, where I'd be sleeping that night, along with his family, the mother, his son, and Kevin's own mother, who insisted I call her mom. The upstairs was certainly an open concept. A frail curtain separated the beds to the sides, with a large open area in the middle. I asked him if I was the only occupant that night. He said yes. I had a feeling he didn't often get occupants. I told him I was very interested in hikes in the area and wanted to get to them before it got dark. He gave me very detailed instructions of his favorite hikes and how to get to them, and off I went. I figured the place wasn't ideal. I wish the website would have let me know that it was still being built. But hey, I booked it last minute and beggars can't be choosers. Plus, he was very friendly and helpful on his hiking advice. I hiked the area until it started getting dark. I didn't pack enough food for the day, and I figured I would head into town for dinner. The nearest town was clearly a booming tourist destination during the summer, but now in the off-season, it was a ghost town. All the hotels and B&Bs in the area were boarded up. Such a ghost town that even the liquor stores were closed for the off-season. Finally, I found a dark and dingy, empty bar to eat dinner. It was, to phrase lightly, a disappointing supper. I had this romantic image in my head of sitting in front of a harbor front, sipping on bubbly, slurping back ocean-fresh oysters. I was assured by the server, bartender, cook, that the fried oysters that I ordered were definitely not fresh. I didn't ask. I figured, with all my options for things to do and see exhausted, I should head back to the hostel and read my book. I got back roughly at 8 p.m. I could smell the family who lived there was in the midst of dinner. A little boy ran down the wood steps to greet me. He yelled, as little boys always do, "My name is JP, what's yours?" I say, "Nice to meet you, JP. My name is Alex." He immediately asked if I wanted to come play. I said definitely, just let me put my bags down in my room first. He followed me through the translucent curtains to my room, so instead of getting settled in, I headed straight out into the main area. I started throwing a foam ball with JP. His mother, father, grandmother were all sitting down to eat without even acknowledging we were there, playing just right in front of them. The mother and father just start what seems to be a basic argument, which turns into them yelling at each other. Completely weirded out, I told JP that I needed to go into my room and call my mommy, as she was wondering where I am. Of course, the boy doesn't understand proper boundaries, and follows me through the curtains and sits on my bed. I'm trying to take his attention away from his family fighting, so I start asking him where he goes to school, his favorite color, etc. His mom starts calling for him, but he doesn't answer, instead chooses to sit on my lap and hug me. Not wanting to cause any problems, I yell to the mom that he's in my room. She runs in and snatches him off my lap and yells to his father, "I know what you're like when you get angry. I'm taking JP, don't follow us." I hear her book it down the stairs and him run after her. I hear a car start up in the lot, and not just drive, but fucking peel out of the driveway. I hear him cursing, a door slams, and the sound of the excavator I had seen outside earlier in the day come on. I guess he wanted to get some handiwork done to let off some steam. Now, just left upstairs is me and Grandma, who still insists I call her Mom. I walk out of my not-so-private curtained room with my bag and say, "Listen, you guys have been great hosts, but I should go." She starts rubbing my arm and telling me to stay, explaining her daughter-in-law doesn't understand Kevin like she does, and she's the real problem. Now, I'm ready to tell the mom to just fuck off and just leave, until I realize she still has a knife in her hand from cooking dinner. It's about a 4-inch knife, but with intent. I'm sure it would do some damage. I don't think she meant it as a threat. I think she was just a kooky old bird who didn't understand. Maybe don't hold a knife when you're trying to console a stranger. So I go along with what she's saying, while she rubs my arm with one hand and flails the knife around in the other. I inch closer and closer downstairs to the door. She keeps rubbing my arm and shoulders with her free hand, telling me to stay, and that her grandson is special, and before I even booked the night with them, that he had a premonition that I would be staying with them. As soon as I get to the door, I run towards my car. I start my engine and back up into the lot to get out of there. Kevin in the excavator blocks my path with about a 5-foot ditch on one side of the drive and the forest behind me. He gets out saying sorry and tells me I should stay. He'll make it up to me. Grandma comes out with a knife still in hand, saying it's Kevin's fault I'm leaving. They bicker for about 5 minutes until I yell that if they don't let me leave, I'm calling the police. All of a sudden, they got super defensive, like I'm being the one unreasonable. So I turn off my engine and start to dial. Kevin gets back into his excavator and starts backing up. As soon as he's far enough, I can see an opening to drive across the grass. I turn my engine back on and rip out the drive. I'm sure doing a number on the suspension of my little sedan. As soon as the property is out of sight, I go to call my friend Kayla. No service. I remember back to earlier that afternoon, when I first got to the hostel. I was going to check my messages and saw that there was no service. Even if I wanted to, I wouldn't have been able to call the cops. I drove the 6 hours straight to New Brunswick and stayed with Kayla. This happened in early 2017. I was a 23-year-old girl, and I just finished college. The field I studied was not huge in my area, so I decided to leave. I moved to the biggest city in my country to make a post-graduation course and look for a job. As I was still unemployed, I decided I would wait to make a long-term rental contract, worrying about a future bad commute to work. In the first couple of months, I was switching between Airbnbs and hostels all the time. I was already tired of this. I decided this would be my last move, and then, with or without a job, I would settle. I was already running out of money and decided to stay in a dorm in a hostel next to where I was taking classes. Sharing a bedroom is no problem to me during a trip, but when you're living somewhere, trying to create a routine and have some privacy, sharing a bed with complete strangers just sucks. I would share the dorm with 3 guys, but it's not with them that I had my bad encounter. They were nice, apart from one of them snoring so bad at night. No biggie. In another dorm, although, was the creepiest person I've ever seen. He was in his mid-30s and was not traveling. He was a native from the city we were in and was using the hostel as a new house since his parents kicked him out of theirs. He introduced himself and tried to be nice and flirty with me. I was polite but declined his invest. He wouldn't stop. He started following me all day long inside the hostel. Anywhere I went, he would show up in less than 5 minutes. On my second day there, I left the hostel to a job interview, and by the time I arrived back, late at night, he was sitting alone at the front stairs waiting for me. He told me this like it was the most natural thing on earth. He would buy me snacks, ask me out, try to get information about my personal life. All of this when I already made it clear of my lack of interest. All this happened in 3 days. I was already exhausted by his presence, but what I didn't know is that it could have went worse. As soon as one of the guys left that we were sharing the dorm with, he asked the hostel staff to switch dorms and stay in my room. Obviously, he didn't tell me this, so imagine how surprised and disgusted I was when I saw him coming to the dorm with all his belongings. I was so scared of his presence that I slept wearing jeans to avoid any sort of advantage he could take on me while I was sleeping. The next morning, I decided to leave. The situation had exponentially went worse, and I couldn't handle it anymore. While I was packing, this guy showed up, noticed what I was doing, and started to cry, asking me not to leave him. Then, to make things more creepy and disgusting, he told me that he would miss seeing my face while I was sleeping, and thank God that he had taken photos. I was trying my best to be chill about his behavior, but I just lost it when he told me he had taken pictures of me while I was sleeping. I took his phone from his hand, asked to see the pictures, and deleted all of them. There is a bunch of photos of me sleeping in the night before. I left the hostel and really regret not reporting him to the staff. Crazy lonely dude from the hostel, please, let's never meet again. A few years ago, I worked at a well-known hostel in Seattle. I worked the graveyard shift, so most of my shift was spent processing reservations and surfing the web. This was when I actually discovered Reddit. Anyway, one night I noticed this ad on Craigslist about a new hostel that had opened up in South Seattle. Being bored and curious, I gave the guy a call to find out the rates, accommodations, etc. He answered with a dry, "Hello." I asked if I called the right number for the hostel, and he responded with a quick, "Oh yeah, how can I help you?" I don't mention that I'm an employee at another hostel, and instead inquire about the location, price, typical stuff. He tells me that the location is hard to describe, and it would be best if I just met him at the closest convenience store, and he would take me to the hostel from there. No thank you. Click. I had heard all I needed to hear. Throughout the rest of my time at my hostel, there would be times that we would be full and would give suggestions to the visitors on places to stay. I made it a point to mention this place as an anti-suggestion. One of my guests actually informed me that he had stayed there a few months before, and it was in fact something to stay away from. The hostel, I'm told, was basically an old house that had been completely gutted. So it was just 2 big rooms, a kitchen, and a large room with bunk beds, dirt floor, and a television in the room with the bunk beds. No travelers, just crackheads and tweakers, who had clearly been living there for some time. No staff. Dude picked him up at the convenience store, as offered, brought him to the hostel, took his money and left. A couple days ago, I woke up and went to the ground floor to go outside for a cigarette. I took the stairs down and opened the door to the lobby, only to be greeted by a girl with a towel around her who looked traumatized, accompanied by ambulance staff. I had actually seen this girl and her friend the night prior coming in with boxes of beer, happy and laughing. Looked like they had a good night ahead of them. I proceeded to go outside and have my cigarette. There were a couple of police officers who came up to me and asked for my details because they suspected I had a warrant for my arrest. I just had a similar appearance to who they were looking for, I guess. Then I saw a detective. That's when I knew something serious had gone down in there, but not sure what exactly. They loaded the girl into the ambulance and the detective jumped in after to interview the girl. I went back inside and eventually came out for another smoke about an hour later. The ambulance and the police were still there. The detective jumped out and the ambulance drove off. There was also a red van parked across the street, just observing what was going on. This is where it gets interesting. One of the officers came out and retrieved a whole bunch of brown bags from the detective's SUV. They went back inside and returned empty-handed. Him and his partner then drove off. About 20 minutes later, the detective comes out with the bags. They were all filled and puts them into her vehicle. She proceeds to keep going in and out for the next hour or so, each time coming out with bags filled with stuff, evidence I'm guessing. There were some clear bags that had some linens and blankets in them. She then comes out with more bags, and there's a man accompanying her who I hadn't seen yet. He wasn't wearing police attire, but had a logo on his shirt that I didn't get a close enough look at to make out. He was carrying out one of those cameras and tripods you see in TV and movies that they use to photograph the crime scene. He loads it into the red van, then drives off. The detective goes back inside. She later comes back out with her partner, who I hadn't seen the whole time. They hop into the SUV and drive off. Nobody came out in cuffs, and no body was rolled out. I assumed they would have done that through the rear entrance. This was the middle of the city and highly populated, so I guess they wanted to keep it out of the public eye. I knew whatever happened was on level 3 because I entered the building earlier right after the police officers, and the indicator said that the elevator was on level 3. Later that night, I decided to go up to level 3 just to have a snoop around. See if there's any crime tape or anything like that. I don't know. I took the stairs because the swipe card doesn't allow me to go to level 3. I'm on level 1. And whoa, as soon as I opened the door to enter the level, I got a huge sense of doom, shivers down my spine, and could just feel a really dark force. I immediately shut the door and went back downstairs. I haven't seen anything on the news, no articles on the internet, nothing. I assume it was a degenerate or some kind because this place was filled with them. Not worth the news or ruining the backpacker's reputation. So many theories running through my head. I didn't see the other girl who I saw entering the night prior. Maybe she fled. Maybe she's the one who was killed. Maybe she was the killer. Maybe the other girl's the killer. Maybe it was self-defense, outright murder, who knows. I can't be certain, but I'm pretty sure it was a homicide from what I saw. So this happened a couple hours ago. I'm a 19-year-old female. I was clubbing with my friends, and around 1:40 in the morning, I told them I was gonna head home. Not a long walk, 5 minutes at most. As I got to the corner of the block that my hostel was on, a man in the back seat of a white car tapped on the window. I turned around to look, and they were all saying things like, "Hey, come here." I turned back around and continued walking, a little scared. Then I heard the car door open, and I see a big old man, maybe in his 30s, get out and walk towards me, saying, "Come back here," repeatedly. I turned back and tried to walk fast towards the hostel, which was about 200 meters from where I was. He kept walking towards me and got faster and faster, but never more than a brisk walk. At this point, I was shitting bricks, and the only thing I could think of was how I was going to be a topic on one of those crime podcasts. I'm going to be one of those girls that gets kidnapped a mere minutes from her home. He continued for another 10 seconds. Meanwhile, I was trying to think of something I could use as a weapon. I had nothing on me except what was in my pockets, ID and money. I turned around and he wasn't there anymore. Scared that he had gone back to the car to drive around and grab me, I ran to my hostel, right to my boyfriend. I can't stop thinking about what they wanted from me. Sorry if this is too mild for this sub. I just kinda wanted to see if anyone had any idea if this sort of stuff happens all the time, and what they might have wanted from me. This story is fresh, as it just happened a few minutes ago, but I will try my best to give you all the details. So, I'm a Pokemon Go player. I was a mild fan of the franchise as a kid, and now, in my mid-20s, I find it allows me to get out of the house more often, and do stuff that doesn't involve, well, my house. If you have played the game, you know there's these places called gymnasiums, where you can place one of your Pokemons to earn you a max of 50 in-game coin per 24 hours. It's quite the popular feature in the game. However, since I live in a huge European city, there are many players to compete with in order to secure a spot at these gyms. The reason why I'm telling you all this is to let you know why in the world I would brave the cold winter of my metropolitan city at 3 a.m. You see, it's not just that I'm stupid, it's also because I know most people are asleep, which in turn allows me to quickly defeat all the Pokemons in the gym and place my own. I've been doing this for a few months, and I've been quite successful. So tonight, the routine was the same. Got dressed, got my coat, my scarf, and my black leather gloves. I went out and made my way to the first of 3 gyms in my area that I usually conquer in the game. It's actually quite fascinating to observe people that wander the city at these hours. Well, tonight, I was gonna meet a special guy. I arrived at the first gym, which was a small street that curves to the right for quite a stretch. I empty it and place my own Pokemon aside. Afterwards, I linger around the area, taking off the gloves to scratch my head, but overall just managing the game and looking things up. Some cars go by, and that's when I see him. This guy, clearly over 6 foot, making his way down the street. Now, these are just my country standards, but everything about him screamed thug, ready to knife you. Sporting a black cap at night, concealing his face with a shadow, padded black jacket with dirty blue jeans and rip-off Timberland boots. My immediate reaction was to keep it cool and natural and just calmly place my cell phone back into my pocket. As he went past me, he gives me this, "What the fuck are you looking at?" kind of look. I couldn't help but give him a small sideways glance as I put my glove back on my hand. I started walking to the next gym, which happened to be in the same direction he was walking towards, and he, to my surprise, started speeding up. Then he pulled out his cell phone and tried to phone someone. This immediately reminded me of my girlfriend, as it was a common tactic she uses when she feels like she's being followed by strangers. Whoever he tried to phone, however, did not pick up. He looks back at me, keeps walking, increasingly faster. He switched sides and starts walking in the middle of the road, effectively distancing himself further and allowing the parked cars to get between me and him. And then, abruptly, he stops. He turns around and asks, "Hey friend, you know how I can find transportation at this hour?" I'm awkwarded out and freaking out at the same time, so without even looking at him, I just said, "At this hour? Only Uber." He starts walking, only when I pass him. Then it hit me, from my perspective, he was a thug-looking dude that could have very well tried to rob me and potentially harm me. But from his perspective, I'm a 6-foot dude in his mid-20s that for some reason decided to pocket his phone the moment he walked past me, then gave him a sideways, "What the fuck are you looking at?" glance as he passed as I put on black leather gloves and started following him, with not a single person awake around, looking like a hitman or serial killer. As anxious as I was, he must have been terrified enough to try to phone someone, or pretend to, and then initiate dialogue with a total stranger at 3 a.m., just to be sure that I wasn't a psycho about to knife him. We walked together in the same direction for almost 10 minutes after that, without looking or talking to one another. Just two awkward guys that did not want to meet each other ever again. This happened a few hours ago during my night shift, and for some reason was so disturbing to me. I'm a police officer in a big city, so I've had to deal with some pretty awful sights and smells while doing this job, usually on a daily basis. This, however, was something even more unusual. There is a large homeless population in the city, with mental health and substance abuse being a common issue among this population. It isn't uncommon to see a homeless person suffering from mental illness acting strange late at night, and if they aren't hurting themselves or anyone else, that's fine with me. It's around 11 p.m. and I'm stopped at a red light on a very quiet and dark road. I'm the only car on the road. I look to my right, just observing the street, and see a skinny man in ragged clothing on the sidewalk. His feet were planted on the ground, belly arched towards the sky, and their hands planted on the ground over their head. I thought, interesting. While holding this position, the person snaps their head towards me, then looks towards the sky, and proceeds to do the fucking exorcist spider walk up the street at a speed which seemed like this was the only way they walked. I immediately thought, what the fuck, as this man navigated the sidewalk in horror movie fashion. I have no idea why that style of walking is so disturbing, but Jesus Christ, did it bring back childhood memories of the Exorcist movie scaring the shit out of me. My partner and I are trying to do an all-nighter to prepare him for his night shift tomorrow. He does the odd shifts here and there with a temp agency, as he is a student. We thought it would be a good idea to walk to the corner store at midnight to keep us awake. And I had a small parcel I could post in the post box while we were at it. The corner store with the said post box is around a 5-minute walk from my home. It's a super quick walk, and our neighborhood is pretty safe. We leave the house, telling his sister whom we live with that we're gonna pop out. Everything was fine. I hold the package in my hand, and when we walk to the shop, we're crossing the road when we see that in the parking spaces outside, there is a van between two cars with its lights on, and when getting closer, there are two adults inside. We walk past the front windshield, and when getting out of the line of sight, we hear the van door open, and a man shout, "Excuse me, you dropped something." The tone was off, and I just got bad vibes. My partner and I looked behind us, and the door slammed, but our view of the van was obstructed by another car. I couldn't tell if the person had sat back in the car or was outside the door. My partner went to walk and check, but I couldn't see anything on the floor from where we stood, so I stopped him. I put my package in the post box, and we crossed from the box, instead of walking back past that windshield again. When I crossed the road, my partner said he saw a male standing outside of the van and walking in front. We got really bad vibes from this and tried to tell ourselves that he was just looking to see if we in fact dropped something, but we had only left the house with my package and my phone, nothing else. We didn't drop anything. When I crossed the road and almost on our street, we saw the van pull out of the parking space and speed up the road towards us. I immediately called his sister and made it clear that I was on the phone while rushing back to our house. They sped up the road past us, going way over the speed limit. Although we didn't share a conversation, we both got the worst vibes from this encounter. I'm confident I didn't drop anything, and that they were waiting by the van door for us to turn back and get closer. I just feel shaken up, to be honest. When I was 5, I would walk to the school bus every morning. One morning, 2 men in a car drove up to me asking, "Have you seen our dog?" Obviously, they didn't have a dog, but me being an idiot, I say, "Well, what's the breed?" "Husky." "Oh, I haven't." "Why don't you come with us to find the puppy?" I was about to get into the car. The guy had a hand on my arm to help me in when I saw my bus, which came super early. I told them I had to go to the bus and ran to the bus before it left. About a week later, 2 young girls were found in a field, sexually assaulted and beaten with a large object. One dead, but the other one survived, telling the cops she was asked to find a husky. To this day, I think if the bus didn't come as early as it did, I would be dead or worse. The following happened last summer, and I haven't told anyone about it yet for some reason. But anyway, I was taking late night walks, especially during the summer, and one night I was taking an unusual route, which I'd regret later. It was about 11 p.m., and the sun had already gone down, but it wasn't completely dark yet. The road I was walking was quite long, and at the end of it, I could see someone walking towards me. I didn't think much of it. When he was about 90 feet away from me, he starts to run. He just looked like he was jogging, and I thought that's what he was doing, so I didn't really react to it. As he got closer, I saw that he was holding something in his hand, and now I started to suspect something, but I just thought it was my imagination running wild again, so I continued to walk. When he was finally about to run past me, he suddenly stopped for a few seconds. I could see that he was staring at me. He walked up to me and said something that will haunt me forever. "Why didn't you run? I could have killed you. You should run the next time." As he was standing there next to me, I could see the object he was holding was a stick taser, like the ones that the guards use. I still wonder what would happen if I had trusted my instincts and started to run. About a couple years ago, I took my dog on a walk on a regular route. She's quite small, a Chihuahua mix who loves people. To get to an actual hiking area, we needed to go through a walking path beside the golf course. There's normally a ton of people walking their dogs, but there were only a couple of them out that day. There are some trees and shrubs along the way, and a section that is completely blocked off from view in the middle. My dog and I are walking through this part when she starts growling. She immediately stops and begins to snarl. An old, disheveled woman holding something behind her back emerged from behind the trees and had a grin on her face, reaching one hand out and trying to pet my dog. My dog takes one look at her and starts barking and snarling. She had never been very protective before, so I just stood there in shock. She kept mumbling, "Touch, touch," so I nervously just backed off and practically sprinted back. A person who had encountered her before me, who had taken another route back, saw me upset and nervous as well. He asked me if I encountered her too. I said yes, and he told me that she was potentially dangerous and that he didn't know what she was holding behind her back. Safe to say, I avoid going there under any circumstances. Earlier tonight, my girlfriend and I decided to go to a local scenic location where people used to hang out called Pot Rocks in central Maryland. However, it was late and the parking lot was currently closed, so we decided to cut through the woods using the trail my friends found when we were younger. Going back at least 7 years later, it was much more overgrown and the tree stand that was once functional was completely destroyed. As we were making our way through, I started feeling increasingly uneasy. Neither of us are really fearful of being in the woods at night. In fact, we do it all the time, but something felt different. I started to joke around about how there was a creepy vibe, and we both laughed it off. About 100 yards later, as we were walking, we heard something large and quiet moving fast behind us, maybe 35 yards back. We stopped and both pointed our lights towards the direction, but couldn't see anything. We kept walking, but I could tell neither of us wanted to continue. We decided to turn around, and as we were walking back, we saw a set of eyes that was so frightening that both of us said nothing and hustled forward from where we came from. Once we made it back to the car, we both were sure that what we heard was not a deer, and neither were the eyes. We also both felt like we were being observed. She also had another strange encounter in those woods not far from where we were, where someone was throwing rocks at them. We both agreed that there's something not right about the area, and don't intend on going back at night. About 2 years ago, me and my then girlfriend Emily would go out for walks. She would do this in her hometown as it was safer than mine, and she had not long been living with me and my parents in my, let's say, not so safe town in the middle of the country. So that evening came and I just got home from a stressful shift when Em said to me, "Can we go out for a walk?" I asked why, and she responded with, "Well, I kind of want to go to Tesco because it would be nice to get some fresh air." I reluctantly agreed. Maybe the walk will help me de-stress, and with the summer nights having a nice breeze, it can't be that bad. At least, I thought anyways. We head out, saying goodbye to my mom, and her giving us the usual talk. Be safe, be quiet when you come in because we'll be asleep. And being a teenager, I replied my typical, "Yeah, sure, Mom." We left Tesco, but Emily needed to be out and hadn't been satisfied, and she asked, "Is there anywhere around that's kind of quiet, like a park or field?" I stood there drinking my water, trying to decide where we can go. There's a field next to the lake. We can go there. And off we went, arriving to the fence that connects to a path leading to a wooded area, but also an open area. I forgot that it would be so dark here, but as luck would have it, I had my dad's heavy-duty flashlight, like the ones police use. Emily had her phone flashlight to help her see. We walked down the now-lit path, coming to a bench under a tree. My ankle, that I broke a few years prior, was in excruciating pain, so we sat down for a few minutes. Emily cuddled up next to me and started to kiss my neck, which led to making out, etc. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a flashlight, but I ignored it and we continued. Then it happened again. I got up, now anxious and curious about the flashes, and suddenly a cyclist rode past us with his lights flashing, which spooked us. We chuckled and kept walking around to find another bench, as we felt our privacy had been ruined a little bit. Now sitting in a more lit area next to the street lamp, we decided to sit close and chat, and we did this for about 10 minutes, when we heard like a twig snap under our heavy foot. Already being on edge from the flashes earlier, I decided to check it out, telling my girlfriend to wait there, and left her with a flashlight for some comfort. Big mistake on my part. I neared the edge of the hedge when I saw a man's foot slightly around the corner, and his phone in hand. Flash. Shit, I muttered under my breath, realizing we were being stalked. He stepped out towards me, his face covered. I was only able to make out that he was wearing a colored jacket with a black band around his arm. It almost looked like tape, and his brown, scuffed up Timberland boots. I freaked, turned to my girlfriend and told her to get up and run. With no hesitation, she took off towards the houses at the edge of the field, dropping my dad's light. I ran, picked up the light, and turned to see the guy a little less than arm's reach from me. I'm not a small guy, tall, stocky, but he was bigger, and trying to fight him, I'd likely lose. So I decided to run. I finally caught up to her, and by the time I did, the guy was long gone. Tears streamed down Emily's face as we continued to walk home, looking over her shoulder all the time. After explaining to my mom what happened, and deciding no more late walks, she suggested ringing the police, but we decided against it as I didn't even see his face. About a month later, I was walking home with a friend that I had made at college, and we were going through the same field. We happened to notice a tent on our path. Being nosy, I looked to see the jacket with a black band and worn Timberland boots. Before I begin, I feel it's important to know that I'm female, about 5'3", somewhat thin, and not a very intimidating looking person. This happened to me back in the summer of 2014. I was walking home from a friend's house on a kind of a cool night. My friend lives a little further than a mile away from me, so it's a bit of a longer walk. To give you some idea of what my route looks like, I have to go on a half block of creepy back roads, turn onto a barely lit main road, cross the main highway, and go down a creepier non-lit back road to get to my house. There is this little hill I have to go down that passes our little local ice cream shop and a trucking dispatcher. I was passing the ice cream shop when I stopped after clearly hearing what sounded like a gunshot. At first, I thought it was a hunter, since hunting was very popular in our town. But after I thought about it, it dawned on me that no one would be hunting at 10 at night, and in city limits. The next thing that happened only confirmed to me that it wasn't a hunter. "He's dead!" in the most horrific sounding scream. I heard what sounded like a man panicking about a few blocks behind me. I presumed that he did it and it was an accident, but I'm not willing to find out. I was panicking a bit and started to speed walk, since all I had to do was cross the highway. Something I should add, before I came close to the highway, I had to make sure it was clear from both sides. Anyways, I turned around to see a man standing about maybe a block or so away, just facing my direction. It was difficult to make out any facial features, since the lighting was shit. Something must have clicked in his brain, because no sooner than I saw him, he started to speed walk towards me. Now, the thought of me being a 14-year-old girl in the middle of the night with some potential crackhead rapist in front of me scared me shitless. I said to myself, "Fuck this shit, I'm out," and darted straight up the incline through the intersection of the highway, not looking back. I bolted down the hill of my creepy back road and ran straight into my house, just barely able to breathe. My mom was very confused and very creeped out when I had told her about my experience. It makes me thankful that my back roads aren't lit. I believe this man was trying to follow me, but stopped because he couldn't see me. I still go to my friend's house at that same route, but never alone at night. If I have to, I always make sure I'm biking. After that night, I never walk anywhere in the town at night. I always bike. This happened relatively recently, and I decided to share it now because it's been nagging at me in the back of my mind for the past few days. It wasn't terrifying, but it was definitely freaky enough to send a shiver down my spine. My older sister, we'll call her Stacy, lives in Missouri, and the rest of my immediate family lives in Illinois, so we didn't get to see her often, but sometimes she would visit. One of these times was back in November. Stacy, my mother, and I decided to go to the mall because my birthday was coming up and they wanted an idea of what to get me. We had just came out of some jewelry store where I picked up a ring, and this skinny, sick-looking man blocked our path down the hallway. The guy had a really creepy smile on his face, and I was super uncomfortable. He turned to my mom. "I like your hair, miss." My mom's hair is beautiful. It's got very pretty tight curls and slightly gray in the front, but isn't anything out of the ordinary. This was odd to me, and I just had a horrible feeling in my stomach. This guy had to be more than 25 years older than my mom was, which was her late 40s. It was just weird to me. My sister didn't seem to have the same feeling I did, because she turned to me and tried to suppress her laughter. "Thank you," my mom smiled, like the polite woman she is, and the man continued, "It's pretty." He reached out to actually touch her hair. We are complete strangers, mind you. My mom backed up uncomfortably and thanked him again before pushing past him quickly. Stacy was still amused by the situation, and we just kept walking. That's when the man called out to us, "Miss." My mom ignored him, and we started walking a little faster. Stacy tugged my arm and had me stand behind my mother alongside her, just to make her feel more comfortable. We assumed everything was fine, but when I looked back, that guy was walking a few paces behind us, not smiling anymore. It freaked me the hell out. I was extremely afraid, and I was shocked how calm both my sister and mother were being. We eventually looked down a mini hallway where there was a closed community bathroom, and we all entered it, shutting the door behind us. I thought this was a horrible idea. I thought he would follow us inside. After a few minutes, however, it was obvious that the man wasn't going to come inside the restroom. I peeked outside and cracked the door, and he was standing across from the bathroom door, looking off into the distance, leaning against the railing. He was waiting for us. I felt like we had trapped ourselves. I closed the door again. "Mom, this guy's waiting for us." My sister looked very worried and suggested calling her dad, just as another woman walked into the restroom. "Hey," my mom caught the woman's attention. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Could we ask you a favor?" It took a few seconds of confusion before the woman nodded her head. "Did you happen to see this African American man out there with a blue hat?" Mom asked, continuing when the woman nodded again. He's been following us. Is there any way you can find an officer to help us out? The woman's eyes were wide and she replied, yeah, of course, before briskly leaving the bathroom. In a matter of minutes, my father had been called and briefed about the situation, and the lady re-entered the room. I got a cop out there, and the guy is gone. Are you guys okay? My sister started to explain the situation to this woman. My mom was still on the phone, and the lady understood how shook up we were and asked if we would like her to escort us out. My mother shook her head, and my sister politely declined. I stayed quiet. I still wanted to be protected, but I was younger than both of them and trusted their judgment. Alright, stay safe. The woman nodded and entered the stall, since we had kept her from using the restroom the first time she came in. We left the bathroom after thanking her and decided that was enough mall for the day. We went home and recounted the story with my brother and father, who up until then had only heard bits and pieces. I was just glad we got home safe, but I still psych myself out sometimes about it. What would have happened if we hadn't gone into the bathroom? What if the woman wasn't there to help us? What if it had only been my mother? It may have played out very, very differently. I'm 19. I was in a mall in France with my friend in the afternoon, around 4 p.m. After a few hours in the mall, we decided to go home. For that, we had to take the subway. The subway station was underneath the mall, so we took the escalators down to go to the station. She was behind me at my right on the escalators. I suddenly felt someone staring at me and being really close to me. I naturally thought it was my friend, but it wasn't. I turned my head and saw my friends looking at the man who was standing behind me. I first thought he wanted to overtake me and go faster up the escalator, so I moved to let him pass. At this point, I'm on the right of the escalators, and my friends are just behind me, and the man is in front of me at my left. But weirdly, he wasn't watching in front of him, he was turned around to stare at me. At this point, I understood that he didn't want to go faster, but just being close to me for some reason that I didn't want to know. My friends and I were a little bit confused. We were talking to make things a little less awkward. As we walked off the escalators to take the stairs that finally lead to the station, the man was still in front of us and suddenly stopped walking. He turned around, stopped me, asked me where the mall was, which made no sense as we were just in it. I politely told him that we were still in the mall. Then he started to talk faster as he saw we wanted to go to the station. He was next to me and asked me if I wanted to become his mistress. He seemed thrilled and tried to convince me by saying he would buy me a lot of clothes and that I would become his doll. At this point, I knew I better run away with my friend. We started to run, took the stairs as fast as we could and entered the station. We stopped to check if he was following us. Fortunately, he wasn't. A few weeks later, I was on a train with another friend. We were talking about the mall, saying that we should go together someday. As we were talking about the mall, I told her what happened to me the last time I went. She seemed confused and asked me to describe the man. So I described him as a white, chubby, short man, mid-50s with gray short hair. She looked at me even more confused. She then told me that the last time she was at the mall with a friend of hers, a man who looked exactly like my description came up to them. He asked them for the directions of the mall. After they answered him, they went to a McDonald's that was in the mall. They were ordering from the machine and noticed a man was standing behind them. My friend turned around and asked him why he followed them. He then started to say some incoherent things and finally asked them for their numbers, saying to them how attractive they were. They both told him to leave, but he didn't. He finally left due to the amount of people that were entering the place. I haven't been back to the mall since, because of lack of time and the quarantine, so I don't know if he's still currently hanging out there. The next time I go there, I will check if he's there or not. If he is, then I'll make an update. I know that those things kind of happen a lot, but I felt insecure that day and wondered what would have happened if less people were around us. So I just found this subreddit, and it reminded me of a time where I was like, probably 18. That being said, I was no longer in the safe minor squad. I was a legal adult in the eyes of the law. This is often a stressful time for a woman, as accusations of sexual assault aren't taken as seriously, unfortunately, but I digress. I was sitting at the mall eating lunch, waiting for my boyfriend at the time to show up. I was alone, which was normal, so I wasn't really fazed. What wasn't normal is when I looked up and saw a group of like 5 or 6 guys approaching me and sitting down with me at my table and the tables next to me at all angles without asking. They were constantly looking around, acting real sketchy, and were badgering me to talk to them, so I felt really awkward. They keep trying to talk to me and were giving me creepy compliments, asking for my number, the usual. So of course, despite having my phone directly in my hand, I was like, sorry, I don't have a phone, hoping they would get the hint. When they told me that they were in their early 20s and late teens, they asked me how old I was. I said I was 16, and they're like, that's okay with me. And naturally by then, I was extremely concerned. Luckily, shortly after, the cops and the mall cops showed up, and I immediately made it clear that I was uncomfortable and not involved with them. Apparently, they were stealing and causing trouble all over the mall. Thankfully, they were removed, and my boyfriend ended up showing up shortly after. Everything turned out okay, and I don't think they were actually going to try to hurt me with a bunch of people around, but you never know. It was definitely a freaky encounter, for sure. Don't know whatever happened to them after that. Keep in mind throughout the story, there's this mall that is basically a big circle with a food court in the middle, where you can walk across to get to the other side of said circle. I live about an hour and a half away from that mall. When I was 16, I had asked my dad to drop me off at the mall, along with my siblings, 8 and 14, while he worked. He agreed and dropped us off at the north entrance. As we walked in, we saw this man that seemed like he wasn't really there mentally, but we ignored him. We walked around the mall for a while, but we kept seeing this man pass us. Sometimes he'd be either in front of us or behind us, usually in the distance. I decided to shrug it off because, like I said before, he didn't seem all there. About an hour later, we went to the food court and got some food. He appeared in the line behind us, and that's when I started to get really weirded out. I told my younger siblings to stay close, and so they did. We finally got our food and chose a spot to sit. As we were eating our food, I see this man pacing back and forth near our table, so I packed up our food and told my siblings that we needed to go. We stand up and he started to head towards us. That's when this little old lady at the table next to us tells us to come over and join her. We agreed. I told her about the weird man, and she said she noticed him eyeballing us and didn't want us to get hurt. It's been a little over a year and a half since this incident, but I still think about the old lady. She saved our lives, and I'm forever thankful. There's this absolutely huge mall in the suburbs, which is a popular hangout spot for teens. A girl who is a friend of my acquaintance was dropped off at the mall by her parents to meet up with a friend. They were gonna go hang out at the shops and go browsing. The parents were to pick them up in a few hours in a designated spot. So the friend of the girl went to the spot where they had agreed to meet up for their weekend afternoon. But the girl was nowhere to be found. The mall was relatively quiet that day because of the pandemic. She started walking around but didn't see anything. She finally reached the bottom of the escalator and heard some strange sounds. She took the escalator that was out of order. She was on the second floor and heard loud footsteps. A man had his hand over a girl's mouth. She was struggling and fighting back as he was attempting to carry her away without anyone seeing. There was this woman with him, looking around. She spotted the friend and yelled, "Drop her, let's go." They let the girl go. She was disheveled and some of her clothes were torn and she was in shock. The police were called. They found that the two had been part of a human trafficking scheme that had kidnapped or attempted to kidnap young women before. So when I was about 15, my parents and I went to a family party. There was music and all the parents were dancing and asked if I would keep an eye on the 5 to 8 kids. I lived in a small town, so I knew the kids and didn't mind watching them. The kids wanted to play tag, and me being a little kid at heart, I was excited to play tag with them. So before the game started, I agreed to be it, and they ran off. I probably should have kept a closer eye on them, but I knew the area and the people, so I didn't really think much of it. I gave them a 30-second head start, but before I began to chase them, I saw a guy I had never seen before. He wore a weird raggy white and tan wool sweater and had a very poorly groomed beard. He stared at me, so I immediately ran off to chase the kids. After we played a few rounds, we all decided to sit down and take a break. We took a seat on some rocks outside, and I noticed a strange man was sitting at a table alone, just staring at us. My "this guy is bad news" alarm started blaring, and I took the kids inside for a minute so I could watch the man. I was staring at him through the window, and he was staring back at me with unsettling eyes. After the longest minute of my life, one of the kids tugged my shirt and asked to play again. I said it was probably a bad idea, but instead, I told him to wait for a second before I made my decision. I stepped outside and noticed the man leaving. I sighed a breath of relief and told my parents what happened, and they said it's probably nothing, which I agreed, and then the kids started playing again. This time, I made sure that all the kids were in groups of 2 or 3, and then I jumped between the groups making sure they were safe. Eventually, they were tired out and we sat on the rocks again, but the man was back. I was so shocked and couldn't even get out a word. The man looked at me and said, "Why don't you all sit down? I like seeing you sit down." I told him to leave, but he just stared at me. Luckily, one of the kids had snuck away and grabbed my dad. My dad grabbed a couple of his friends and they told the guy to get out of there. He left and the party kinda ended after that. To the man in the sweater, let's not meet again. I didn't go to uni, but my best friend Tessa did. So of course I wanted to go to her housewarming party after I hadn't seen her for so long. I drove to her new house, about an hour's drive from me, and met her early so we could go out for dinner and pick up some cheap alcohol and mixers for later. When we got into the house, I was introduced to some of her new housemates for the first time and picked a seat on a rusty brown sofa that looked like a dog's chew toy. It wasn't glamorous, but Tessa was so excited for her two worlds to collide. A little bit of awkwardness later, I realized that I'm the only new person and everyone knows each other. The house slowly fills up with people, drinks are poured, and the volume is rising on the speakers. A little bit of backstory. I'm in a career where I have to have an extended DBS check all the time and cannot have anything on my criminal record, not even a driving offense. I don't really know anyone, and after coming back from the bathroom, I can't find my friend. I don't really know the house that well, so I go upstairs to look for her. As I get to the first bedroom, I'm welcomed by a crowd of shrieking girls that wanted to compliment my hair and nails. I asked them if they've seen Tessa, and they said no. As I turn to leave, I'm blocked by these 3 guys leaning over the dresser, doing lines of coke. I'm a bit taken aback, but avoid eye contact and try the next room. In the next bedroom, there's loads of people sitting and standing and just talking. As I walk into the room further, I get shouted at by a guy that I'm letting it out. Then I'm whacked in the face with the strongest smell of weed. I walk straight back out. After doing a quick scan and still not being able to see her, I then try the bathroom on the landing, and it's just another girls chatting and giving life advice. After telling them that Craig ain't shit and he doesn't care about you, and them telling me that they didn't know Tessa, I leave to try my luck somewhere else. I'm feeling pretty lost. I can't leave the house because I've been drinking, and I was supposed to stay over that night. I go back downstairs into the back bedroom, just off the extension. I open the door to the room that I'm staying in that night, with all my stuff in it, and it's dark and quiet. I sit on the bed, get out my phone, and start texting my boyfriend. Stuff like how I wish I didn't come, and how I didn't want to be there. As I'm looking at my phone, I hear the small metal from a little tiny bolt scrape across the door. I can't see the other side of the room, so I lock my phone on bright to see better, and can't make out the shapes. Then I hear a guy's voice. "Sorry, I just didn't want anyone else to come in." That did not put me at ease. I awkwardly laugh and try to undo the lock to go back out and quickly slip through the door. I finally get to the kitchen where there's a girl slumped on the floor, her head down, murmuring to herself. I can't just look away and just want to know if she's okay, so I reach out and hold her arm and ask her if she wants to sit on the sofa. A guy stood next to her drinking Jack Daniels straight from the bottle and tells me, "She don't need to go. Leave her. She's coming down and just needs a little pick-me-up, don't ya, babe?" As he passes her a cup from the counter with pinkish-looking liquid inside. Everyone is just looking at me, so I squeeze past to get to the garden, which is where I found her. 3 guys stood over her as she was passed out on the grass. They're taking pictures. I get a horrible lump in my throat, and the 3 guys are laughing. Instincts kick in and I run to her, sitting her up so she doesn't choke. The guys are laughing at her, shouting, "Tessa baby, look at the camera. Tessa, you're gonna love this." I don't know how she knew them, but I didn't, and I was mad. She snapped back to reality and told me that she just felt a bit tired, so she had a quick power nap. After sobering up to that, I slept in my car in fear of the strange guy locked in my room, the girls in the bedroom doing coke, the girl in the kitchen passed out from who knows what, and the fear of being there when the police came. It was selfish, but I stayed until I knew my friend was in bed and the other girls were around. I just couldn't be in that house. I'm a female and 25 years old. Back in 2011, when I was 16, I did an exchange year in the States. It was my first time being away for a long period of time, around 10 months. It was a really awesome experience, and I recommend a year abroad to anyone. But I had a really creepy encounter, the one that also makes you second guess your decision making skills. I think it was a Wednesday around May or June, and I had to meet a friend to go to the promenade and just walk around, eat, and talk. We had church that night, and he had to prepare something for service. I'm not really religious, but since my friends and my host family went to church, I went along with them. Since I didn't need to help, I decided to go to the promenade and maybe do some shopping. After he left, I walked around for a little bit, up on the beach, eating frozen yogurt and listening to some music. Then I felt a slight tap on my shoulder, and I turned around, kinda expecting someone I knew. But there was this guy with blonde, short-length hair that was kinda wavy, pale skin, and around 25 I would guess. If I remember correctly, he was a little shorter than me, or maybe around the same height. He said hi, and I said hi back. He asked me what I was doing here all alone, and I told him I was waiting for a friend. He nodded and asked if I wanted to walk around while I was waiting, since he had nothing to do. For some stupid reason I said yes. Please don't ask me why. I'm really bad at turning people I don't know down. I got up and we started walking aimlessly, but it eventually ended up near the pier. He asked me a bunch of questions, where I was from, what I was doing here in the States, if I liked it here, if I had friends, and so on. He had an Eastern European accent, and I think he also mentioned that he's from Croatia, or another country in that area. Eventually, he started asking me if I had a boyfriend, and when I declined, he asked me what my type was. I answered him, I like Japanese guys. I used to be kind of a weeb. And he said that he knew some Japanese guys, and that a friend of his was having a party close by. He invited me, and my stomach dropped. Up until then, I had this suspicious feeling about him, but then it changed into full stranger danger mode. I felt cold, and I remember my heart racing like crazy. I declined nervously, and he asked me why. I told him I was still waiting for my friend, but he said he'll just show me where the party is, and that I could come back again later, after I was done with whatever I was doing with my friend. I declined again, and he asked if I was scared of him. I just answered that I didn't know when I would be done, and that my friend would arrive any minute. While I was talking to him, I texted my friend to call me to get me out of the situation. But luckily he did, and I kinda talked to myself because he had no idea what was going on. Just asked him where he was waiting, made up a location nearby, and then hung up. I then told the guy that my friend was waiting for me and I had to leave. He tried to get me to stay, but I declined and walked away. I feared he might follow me, but luckily he didn't. I don't think he believed me when I said my friend was waiting for me, but screw that. I just wanted to get out of that situation. Later at church, he asked me what was going on, and I told him the story. He said that I was stupid for interacting with the guy in the first place, which I knew. But he's glad that I didn't do anything stupid, like actually go with him. The guy might have just been a weird dude with no bad intentions, but please don't invite underage girls to go to a party with you. It just makes you look like a creep. This happened about 20 years ago, and I was reminded of the event talking with my wife. It's not so much scary as creepy and disgusting, and gave me a small glimpse into what women must feel like with all these creepy dudes. So I was 25 and on my lunch break, enjoying the nice day sitting at the park in the back of my old '89 Nissan 4-wheel drive pickup, with a sliding glass window open, jamming to some And Justice for All, eating my burger and fries. This minivan pulls up, and the skinny old man wearing a gray leisure suit, think Mr. Furley's outfit in Three's Company. I know I dated myself and lost a lot of millennials with that reference. Anyway, he asked me, the very shy introverted me, who normally gives you the fuck off and die glare, if I'm the guy that he was supposed to meet to follow to a party. I of course said no, and hoped that was that. Of course not. He comes back and asks me if I'm sure that I'm not the guy that he's supposed to meet up with. Yeah, I guess I must have forgot, right? No, I said, I'm on my lunch break. Then he asked me if I go to those kind of parties. He says with a disgusting grin, sex parties. I was disgusted and yelled, no! And he was like, calm down. I was so creeped out that I just wanted to finish my lunch and go back to work when this asshole pulls up to me a third time, telling me that supposedly some girl in another car in the park was giving a guy a BJ. I snapped and screamed at him, fuck off, asshole, jumped into my truck and blared Metallica. The consensus from my co-workers, friends, ex-girlfriend, and now my awesome wife for 15 years, and myself, that there was no party, and that he was, I guess, hoping to entice a 25-year-old metalhead dude to suck his dick at the park. So the creepy minivan sex party perv, you're probably dead by now, but if not, let's not meet again. My partner and I have become avid campers since our time together. We don't go anywhere too extreme and opt for well-traversed campgrounds, as we love meeting and getting to know the other campers. One of our favorite spots is a man-made quarry, turned private fenced-in campgrounds that boast around 3,000 campsites in rural Ohio. This incident happened at that campground, September 28, 2019. We brought our camper instead of our tent gear, but were stuck up by the front with all the other RVs and pulled behind campers. We were bummed, but since we love spending time in the woods, we opted to spend most of the weekend hiking through the woods and visiting other campsites. Late in the evening, we were doing one of our hikes where we came up with a brilliant idea to get lost, or walk with no direction, and just take different paths and turns as we came across them. Since it was all fenced in, we figured there wasn't much bad that could happen. All of our twists and turns ended up taking us back to the very campgrounds, where campsites are more far apart from each other and neighbor several hundred acres of forest behind the campground's fence. It was a nice quiet stroll and went on for a while. My partner noticed a porta-john and stated that he needed to make a stop. I said okay and kept walking ahead, both to give him privacy and to just drink in the beautiful summer night alone. I stopped maybe 30 feet ahead down the path. A few minutes passed before something happened. As I was standing there with my back towards the porta-john, I heard rustling noises behind me, then a thud. Thinking it was my partner finishing up and exiting the porta-john, I waited a couple more seconds for him to catch up to me as I looked out into the woods. My partner is tall and athletic, and I heard him running behind me. I both heard the footfalls and felt him come up behind me quickly, as if he was trying to spook me. I smiled and spun around really fast to look up at him and catch him right before he could touch me, but to my shock, when I spun around, there was no one there. No one. Not my partner, not another person on the path. No one even in the sparse campsites within eyesight, but I swear on my life I could feel someone standing directly in front of me. Someone or something, just as tall, if not taller than my partner. I know what it feels like to have him tower over me, and I felt that same sensation. I instantly dropped my smile and froze. I didn't know what to do. I felt like if I moved, I would be in serious danger, and I felt like I suddenly couldn't hear anything. It just felt like time stopped, and I didn't even want to breathe. The air got heavy and tense, almost like it got very humid very fast. Just when I felt the tension was at its peak, my partner exited the porta-john and loudly started talking to me while walking over. As soon as he was within 8 feet of me, the sensation of someone standing in front of me disappeared. The air cleared and the heaviness quickly dissipated. The whole incident couldn't have been more than 20 seconds, but it felt so much longer. I said nothing as we continued to walk, shaken. I asked to go head back to the camper. I generally believe that if I had walked in a bit farther ahead, or if my partner had just taken a minute longer, I wouldn't be typing this. I lived in the Pacific Northwest in Kitsap County, Washington. Since then, I've always lived on the edge of a body of water, mainly the Great Lakes, Erie, and Ontario. I currently live in a country that has been previously mentioned in one of the missing 411 cases. I can't help but feel that I dodged a bullet that night, even though I had no idea what could have been facing me at the time, and I didn't discover the missing 411 phenomena until this year. I'm grateful for my partner every day and view him as my protector. Hi all, I ran into Pilates' work a few months ago from a YouTube video that mentioned him in Missing 411. I've yet to read his books, but I've seen his movies, and had a deep dive on his YouTube channel to learn some more. A common component from people's experiences seems to be an inexplicable feeling of foreboding or of being watched. I had experienced something along those lines when I was hiking in the Alabama hills 2 years ago. I have never spoken or written about this experience before, and I'm honestly struggling to make sense of it. I was on my way back to California from 2 weeks of camping, sightseeing in Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho. I wanted to camp in the Alabama hills before driving through Yosemite and back to my home in the Bay Area. However, I spent the night before camping in the Antelope Island State Park in Utah. Then did some shopping in Salt Lake City before I decided to take the Highway 50, the loneliest highway, through Nevada, and then a quick drive through Great Bison National Park before crossing the border into California. By the time I got to the Alabama hills, it was dark, and I didn't want to mess around with trying to find a campsite in the dark, unfamiliar terrain, and I really wanted a shower, so I decided to get a motel room for the night in Lone Pine, California. The following morning I was up before the sun, figuring there'd be some spectacular sunrise photos to be had from Alabama hills. After driving around and taking pictures, I thought I would go for a hike to stretch my legs and exercise the dog for a bit before the long drive to Yosemite. There's an arch formation that didn't seem too far off the hike, so that was my intended destination. I had the dog off leash, and we were well on our way, maybe 200 yards from the truck, when suddenly my dog stops in the middle of the trail and just freezes, staring at something up ahead. I walk up to him and stop, trying to see what he's staring at. The sun was sort of in my eyes and I couldn't really make out anything. Suddenly my dog got his hackles up and bares his teeth, starts growling and lets loose a frantic volley of barking. Thought that it must be a predator, coyotes, maybe a mountain lion or something, so I immediately reached for my pepper spray. Now, my dog is no stranger to nature. I've had him for 4 years at this point, and he's been in more national parks than almost anyone I knew. We racked up a lot of miles together, and I can read his body language very well. I've seen him scared from fireworks, but I've never seen him get aggressive at anything. He's not a barker by nature, unless UPS is delivering at my house or the doorbell goes off. He's part terrier and has a strong prey drive, so he will go after anything that runs away from him. Cats, squirrels, birds. But he's also a big pussy and won't generally mess with bigger animals. The day before, we had walked past a herd of bison and he didn't utter a peep. So to see him just absolutely frantically aggressive and scared at the same time just baffled me, and it immediately started ringing alarm bells. Now, I don't know if it was feeding off my dog's energy, but I suddenly got this very deep sense of foreboding, like something was watching and hunting me. It instantly triggered my fight or flight reflex, mainly flight because I still couldn't see anything. Now, I'm 40 years old, grew up in the middle of a civil war. I was a bona fide gang member in my teens. I'm a US Army infantry veteran, and I've been working as a security contractor since I separated from the service. In short, I've seen some stuff, and I have some faith in my fighting abilities. This was one of the few times in my life where I was really scared for my life. Legs wobbly, can't breathe kinda scared. I transferred my pepper spray to my left hand and drew my pocket knife into an overgrip on my right hand. I was kicking myself for leaving my Glock 19 behind in the truck. We were at a standoff for what felt like an eternity, but was probably no longer than a minute. My dog, alternating between staring and barking, still with his hackles up, head down, teeth bared, all classic signs of aggression. I tried to coax him forward, but he wasn't budging. I was also reluctant to turn my back just in case it was a mountain lion, and I didn't want to trigger the attack, so I started retreating, face and body still facing forward. I started stepping backwards. My dog also started stepping backwards right next to me, still growling, still with his hackles up. We backtracked maybe 20 yards around this rock formation when my dog suddenly bolts back to the truck. You know that joke about two guys and the bear and just needed to run faster than the other guy? Well, I was that other guy. And the absurdly comical thought that passed through my head was, you little shit, you just left me to be Ian. My dog was gone. I wasn't as fast as him, and I couldn't remember the last time I ran, but I ran after him, downhill, full on scared for my life, sprinting. Another absurd thought popped in my head. If I trip now and accidentally stab myself with my own knife, my mom's gonna laugh at my funeral. Finally, the terrain opens up, and I can see my truck and my dog stopped and looks back at me, no longer in an aggressive posture. So I come to a stop and turn around, ready to fight whatever was chasing me. Nothing. Not a damn thing. I've never told the story to anyone else because it makes me sound like a big pussy, but the fear was very real. Even just typing this up and recounting this, I'm getting shivers and the tingly feeling, and I probably have elevated blood pressure right now. I've never seen my dog act that way before, so maybe I was just feeding off his energy and his fear transferred to me. I don't know. I can't explain it, but it's one of those few times in my life that I felt like prey. I don't go unarmed in nature anymore. I do have a license to carry, but very often when I'm out there, I didn't bother to carry a firearm. Prior to this incident, I thought the biggest threat I would encounter were other people, so I usually only carried in urban situations. Not that there's no bad people in the wild, but I figured the odds were in my favor. Not anymore. I'd probably carry an AR pistol with drum mags the next time I go hiking way out there.